Hey there, story lovers. This is Vision Harry, and we're bringing you an epic adventure. What if Harry's Phoenix inheritance activated at age 6 and Fawkes revealed Dumbledore's 15-year manipulation plan? Hit like, subscribe, and let's begin this journey. Chapter 1. Ember. The cupboard under the stairs at number 4, Privet Drive was exactly 37 inches wide and 52 inches long. Harry knew this because he had measured it, carefully, using the length of his own hand as a unit, 5 hands wide, 7 hands long, and just tall enough that he could sit up straight if he tucked his chin. He had measured it at age 4, when measuring things felt like the only kind of power available to him. At age 6, he knew better. There was no power in knowing the size of your cage. It was August, and the heat inside the cupboard was the specific, airless kind that only exists in small enclosed spaces in English summers. Outside, he could hear Dudley shrieking with laughter in the garden, the wet slap of a water balloon hitting pavement, Aunt Petunia's delighted high-pitched encouragement. Through the thin gap under the cupboard door, a blade of afternoon light sliced across the floor and landed on Harry's bare foot, which was dirty because he hadn't been allowed to use the bathroom since morning. He hadn't eaten since yesterday. This wasn't new. The Dursleys operated on a kind of rhythmic punishment schedule that Harry had long since charted. Dudley's good moods meant Harry got fed, Dudley's bad moods meant Harry didn't. Yesterday, Dudley had wanted the last biscuit and Harry had been standing too close to it, and that had been that. Uncle Vernon had grabbed him by the collar of his oversized shirt, Dudley's cast-off, 3 sizes too large, and put him in the cupboard with the particular grunt of a man who believes he's being quite reasonable about everything. Harry had stopped crying about it around age 5. Not because it stopped hurting. Just because crying cost energy he didn't have. He was sitting with his back against the wall, knees pulled to his chest, thinking about nothing very much, when something changed. It started in his chest. A warmth that had nothing to do with the August heat, deeper than that, older than that, something that felt like it had been waiting inside his ribs the way an ember waits inside a coal. He pressed his hand flat against his sternum. His heartbeat felt different. Slower. More deliberate. Like something very large and very calm had settled its rhythm inside him and his heart was simply following along. Then his scar prickled. Not the sharp, nauseating pain he'd felt before, the kind of pain that came sometimes in nightmares he couldn't remember, but something adjacent to it. Something that recognized the mark and then moved past it, went deeper, touched something the scar had never touched. Harry opened his eyes. The cupboard was dark, which it always was once the light under the door faded. But there was light now coming from somewhere that had nothing to do with the afternoon sun. It was coming from his hands. Not a glow, exactly. More like heat made visible. The air around his fingers shimmered the way it does above hot tarmac in summer, and at the center of each palm there was a faint, pulsing orange gold, like the last bright core of a bonfire that hasn't quite gone out. It didn't hurt. It felt, actually, like the only part of him that had ever been warm in the right way. He stared at his hands for a long moment. Then, from outside the cupboard, not from the garden, not from the kitchen, but from directly in front of the door, from the hallway itself, came a sound he had never heard before and would spend the rest of his life recognizing instantly. A single, clear, falling note, like a cello string plucked by someone who understood grief, followed immediately by a rising trill that made the hair on his arms stand up and his chest fill with something he had no name for at 6 years old but would later identify as the specific ache of being witnessed. Then the door moved. Not opened, moved. The lock, a sliding bolt that Uncle Vernon had fitted himself with evident pride, drew back on its own. The door swung inward 3 inches, and through the gap came a light that was absolutely, unmistakably gold. Harry didn't move for 3 full seconds. Then, because he had already decided somewhere very deep and very young in himself that he would not spend his life flinching away from things, he leaned forward and looked through the gap. The bird sitting in the hallway of number 4, Privet Drive was the size of a swan, though it held itself nothing like one. It sat on the floor with a stillness that suggested it could have been sitting there for 100 years if it needed to. Its plumage was the red and gold of actual fire, not metaphorically, not poetically, but with the genuine sense that if you reached out and touched it you might be surprised not to feel heat. Its tail feathers puddled on the linoleum like liquid flame. Its eyes, when it turned them on Harry, were black and ancient and held something that was not intelligence exactly. Intelligence was too small a word for it, but something more like recognition. It looked at Harry the way nothing in Harry's life had ever looked at him before. Like he mattered. Not as a problem to be managed or a burden to be housed or a weapon to be aimed. Like he was a person, specific and irreplaceable, and it had come a long way to find him. Harry pushed the cupboard door all the way open and crawled out into the hallway. He sat on the linoleum floor, cross-legged, a thin 6-year-old in a shirt 3 sizes too big, his glasses slightly bent from where Dudley had stood on them last week, and he looked at the bird and the bird looked at him. "You're real," Harry said. The bird made that sound again, not quite music, not quite language, but something that lived in the space between them and meant something. Harry felt it in his sternum, in the same place the ember warmth had started. He felt it in the backs of his eyes. "What are you?" he asked, and then, because this felt immediately insufficient, "Who are you?" The bird extended one wing, slowly, deliberately, nothing like a bird startled into motion but more like a door being opened, and touched the tip of it to Harry's forehead. Not to the scar. Just beside it. The hallway disappeared. What Harry experienced for the next unknown span of time was not quite a vision and not quite a memory and not quite a dream. It was more like being stood inside a story that had already happened, close enough to feel the heat of it. He saw a man. Old, white-haired, half-moon spectacles, robes like moving water in shades of blue and silver. He had a face that Harry would later describe as kind in the way that marble statues are kind, technically correct, emotionally inert. He was standing in a circular office full of silver instruments and portraits of sleeping people, and he was speaking to a woman with sharp eyes and a pointed hat. "The boy must believe he is loved," the man was saying, and the word believe carried a weight that the word love didn't. Not protected. Not powerful. Loved and ordinary and completely unprepared. He must walk toward his death willingly. That is the only way. The scene shifted. A different memory, older. A woman, young, red-haired, laughing, walking into a room where the same old man sat. The woman was carrying a baby. The man's expression when he looked at the baby was the expression of a person looking at a piece on a chessboard. "She is remarkable, that bloodline," he said, almost to himself. "The Phoenix inheritance has not manifested in 3 centuries. If it emerges in the child, there will be adjustments to make." Harry, standing in the memory, invisible and 6 years old, watched the man's face and understood, with the terrible clarity of a child who has never been lied to kindly enough to miss the lie, that the man was talking about him. That he had been talking about him before he could even walk. The woman, his mother, Harry knew this without being told, knew it in the ember warmth in his chest, pulled the baby slightly closer. She didn't know what the old man was thinking. Harry could see that clearly. She trusted him completely. Harry felt something very cold sit down beside the warmth in his chest. More scenes. A night with green light and screaming that Harry skipped through quickly because even now, even at 6, that particular memory was razor-edged. A house in ruins. An old man walking through rubble with his wand out, quiet and purposeful, lifting a sleeping baby from the wreckage with the efficiency of a man completing a task. The old man looking at the baby's scar. Not with grief. With calculation. "Better than I hoped," he murmured. Then, softer, something that almost, sounded like regret, "Forgive me, dear boy." Then he walked to a street Harry recognized. Privet Drive. Number 4. He laid the baby on the doorstep with a letter and stood in the dark for a long moment, looking at the ordinary house, and his face did something complicated. Then he left. 15 years of careful architecture, spread out before Harry like a blueprint. The Dursleys chosen not for love but for the blood protection, yes, but also, and this was the part that burned worst, for the ordinary misery of them. The old man had known what the Dursleys were. Had checked. Had decided that a boy who grew up small and overlooked and grateful for crumbs would be a boy who walked uncomplaining toward a prophesied death. Harry saw the prophecy. He didn't understand all of it yet, but he understood enough, a single phrase hovering in the vision like a brand, the one with the power to vanquish the Dark Lord must die. He understood that the old man had read this prophecy and had spent 15 years engineering a boy who would comply with his own death. He saw his name in letters he hadn't been sent yet, blocked by the old man at every turn. He saw Sirius Black in a cell, screaming, with no trial, placed there by a word from the same old man. He saw Hagrid, kind giant-hearted Hagrid, used as a courier. He saw teachers hired and hired again based on what they would and wouldn't report back. He saw a red-haired family given a small but regular financial gift that arrived anonymously and had started the year after a woman named Lily Evans died. He saw his whole life as it had been planned. Then the bird's wing lifted from his forehead and Harry was back in the hallway of number 4, Privet Drive, sitting on the linoleum, and he was 6 years old and something fundamental about him had changed. He sat very still for a moment. His hands were still glowing. Brighter now. He looked at the bird, Fawkes. He knew the name now from the vision, Dumbledore's familiar, Dumbledore's spy and conscience, and the one thing in that circular office that had apparently developed its own opinion about a boy on a doorstep, and he took a breath. "How long have you known?" Harry asked. Fawkes made a sound that was not evasion. It was honest in the way that only something incapable of language can be honest, completely, without cushioning. The sound said, "Long enough that I should have come sooner." "Are you going to tell him you came?" Harry asked. The bird tilted its head. The ancient eyes blinked slowly. Then it made a sound that was unmistakably, clearly, no. Harry nodded. He felt the coldness and the warmth in his chest sitting side by side, not canceling each other out but coexisting, the way grief and anger coexist, the way love and fury can share a heartbeat without contradiction. "Right," he said, in the quiet, matter-of-fact tone of a child who has just learned that the entire framework of his existence was a construction and has decided to build his own. "You'd better teach me, then." From the garden, Dudley screamed with laughter. Aunt Petunia called that it was time for ice cream. Uncle Vernon's car turned into the driveway. The ordinary world of number 4 carried on without any awareness that the thing it had been containing for 6 years had just stopped being containable. Harry looked down at his hands. The glow had steadied into something constant, something settled. Not frantic. Not frightened. Just present, the way a hearth fire is present, warm and unwavering and perfectly capable of burning the house down if the house required it. He got to his feet. The next 3 weeks were the strangest of Harry's life, which was saying something given that his life had included a teacher whose turban smelled of garlic and a cousin who had once sat on his head for 20 minutes on a dare. Fawkes came every night. He couldn't stay, Harry understood this, worked out the logic of it on his own without needing to be told. Dumbledore's familiar vanishing for extended periods would be noticed. So Fawkes came after midnight, when the house was quiet and Uncle Vernon's snoring was audible through 2 walls, and he brought the kind of teaching that required no books. The first lesson was fire. Not destruction. Harry had expected, half feared, that the power building in him would want to destroy things. The cupboard door, for instance. The lock. Uncle Vernon. The fire didn't work that way. It was more interested in transformation than destruction, in changing the state of things rather than ending them. Fawkes demonstrated by landing on the windowsill of the tiny bedroom Harry had been reluctantly moved into after the neighbors asked pointed questions about where the nephew was sleeping, and letting a small flame run down his tail feather and off the tip and onto a dead leaf Harry had brought inside. The leaf didn't burn. It became something else, dried and brittle one moment, then green and living the next, the fire moving through it like water through cloth. Harry had held his hands over the leaf afterward and felt the warmth in his palms respond to it. He tried, very carefully, to do what Fawkes had done, not burn, but change. The leaf turned gold. Metallic gold, like a pressed coin. Not alive, not dead. Something new. Fawkes had trilled with what Harry was already learning to read as approval. The second lesson was harder. Fawkes sat very still in the middle of the room and looked at Harry and waited. Harry stared back, confused, for about 5 minutes before he stopped thinking about what he was supposed to be doing and just looked. Really looked. At the bird. At the firelight playing in those ancient eyes. He felt the connection the moment he stopped trying to find it. A thread, warm, humming, real, between his chest and the bird's. It wasn't like the Dursleys' house telephone or even like the way he'd heard electricity described in school. It was more like the way two instruments in tune with each other will resonate when you pluck one string. He was a string. Fawkes was a string. When one moved, the other felt it. He understood, in that moment, that this was what Phoenix bonding felt like. Not ownership. Not service. Something older and more mutual than either. The third lesson came without Fawkes. Harry woke up on a Tuesday morning 3 weeks after the ember had first ignited, and found that he could feel the wards on the house. Not see them, feel them. The way you can feel a change in air pressure before a storm. Dumbledore's blood wards, thick and old and humming with the particular magic of maternal sacrifice, wrapped the house like a second skin. Harry lay in his small bed and traced them with his awareness the way you trace a wall in the dark with your fingertips. He could feel where they were strong and where they were thinner. He could feel the intent woven into them, keep him safe, and he could also feel the secondary intent underneath, quieter and older and placed by a different hand, keep him here. Two different purposes. One structure. Harry spent the morning pulling the secondary threads loose. He did it slowly and carefully, the way you'd pick a knot out of a shoelace without breaking the shoelace itself. The keeping safe parts of the ward, he left completely alone. The keeping here parts, the subtle compulsion woven in that made the outside world feel slightly less real, slightly less urgent, that made the idea of leaving feel slightly too big and slightly too frightening, he unpicked, one thread at a time, over 4 hours. By lunch the house felt different. Lighter. Like a room when a window you didn't know was sealed gets opened. Harry ate the half sandwich Aunt Petunia left on the counter without being seen doing it, which was a skill he had developed to a high art, and thought carefully about his next step. He needed information. Real information, not the scraps Fawkes' visions had provided. He needed to know what the wizarding world looked like from the outside, not from Dumbledore's carefully curated point of view. He needed to know about his parents' estate, about the Black family's legal situation, about the exact wording of the prophecy and who had heard it and when. He needed, specifically, to reach someone who had no reason to report back to a white-haired man in a circular office. The problem was that he was 6 years old, he lived on a Muggle street, and he had no owl. He thought about this for 3 days. Then he thought about it differently, not how do I reach the wizarding world but where is the wizarding world closest to me. The answer turned out to be a pub called the Leaky Cauldron, which he knew from Fawkes' visions was the entrance to Diagon Alley, which was approximately 1.5 hours from Privet Drive by bus if you took the number 7, from the High Street. The bus cost 40 pence. Harry had exactly 93 pence in a small tin under his floorboard, saved over 18 months from the occasional coins people dropped and didn't notice near him. He waited for a Saturday when the Dursleys were at Marge's for the day and he was left with strict instructions to tidy the garden and no dinner if it wasn't done. He tidied the garden in 45 minutes, he was fast when motivated, and then he put on his least terrible clothes, which were still Dudley's cast-offs but at least didn't have cartoon dinosaurs on them, and he walked to the High Street and got on the number 7 bus. He had 3 pence left over when he got off near Charing Cross Road. The Leaky Cauldron, from the outside, looked like exactly nothing. Harry walked past it twice before the warmth in his chest tugged him back, not urgently, just steadily, like a compass needle settling. He stood in front of the grimy facade and looked at it and a tired-looking man in a top hat walked out of it and walked straight past Harry without acknowledging him and Harry walked in. The inside was dim and smelled of old wood and spilled butterbeer and something faintly sulphurous. Several people in robes were sitting at tables, and an old, bald barman was polishing a glass with a rag that appeared to be making it dirtier. Nobody paid any attention to a small boy in overlarge clothes. Harry walked to the bar and waited until the barman looked at him. The barman, Tom, according to the name stitched on his apron, looked at him, then looked a second time, then went slightly pale and then very deliberately looked at the glass he was polishing. "I need to get to Diagon Alley," Harry said. Tom opened and closed his mouth. His eyes kept sliding to Harry's forehead, to the fringe of dark hair covering the scar, and then sliding away. "Are you, that is, I don't, are you accompanied, young sir?" "No," Harry said. "Perhaps I should, there are guidelines, you understand, about," Tom set down the glass. "Perhaps I should send an owl to, please don't," Harry said. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't threaten. He just said it with a quiet certainty that apparently communicated itself very clearly, because Tom stopped mid-sentence and looked at him properly for the first time. Whatever Tom saw, a 6-year-old with phoenix fire sitting quietly behind green eyes, made him close his mouth and reach under the bar for a small trash bin and put it to the side. "Through the back," Tom said. "You know the bricks? 3 up, 2 across," Harry said. Tom stared at him. "Right. Yes." He paused. "Can I get you anything first?" "You look," he stopped, because what he'd been about to say was hungry and something about Harry's expression suggested that particular observation wouldn't be welcomed. "I'm fine," Harry said. "Thank you." He went through the back. Diagon Alley hit him like a wave of color and noise after the monochrome of Privet Drive. He stood in the entrance for a moment and let it happen, the shouting vendors, the robes in every color, the owl hooting from a cage outside Elop's, the smell of something delicious from the bakery 2 shops down, the general wonderful chaos of a place that had never pretended to be anything other than what it was. He didn't linger. He had a destination. Gringotts Bank stood at the far end of the alley like a statement. White marble, imposing columns, goblins at every door with expressions that said they'd seen everything and been impressed by none of it. Harry walked straight up the marble steps. The goblin at the door looked down at him. Harry looked up at the goblin. "I need to speak with the Potter account manager," he said. "My name is Harry Potter." The goblin's expression did not change. This was a goblin. Goblin expressions were immovable in most circumstances. But something in its eyes, a sharp, assessing flicker, suggested that this request had landed somewhere more interesting than the usual. "Identification," the goblin said. Harry pushed his fringe up and showed his scar. Then he held out his right hand, where the phoenix warmth was sitting in his palm like a second heartbeat. The goblin looked at the scar. Looked at his hand. Then stepped aside. "Blood check first," it said. "Standard procedure for contested inheritance claims." "I'm not contesting anything," Harry said. "I'm claiming what's already mine." "Yes," said the goblin, with the first expression that might have been approval. "That is generally how it works." The account manager's name was Sharpfong, which Harry felt was either an excellent name or a description, and possibly both. He was older than the goblins at the door, with deep carved lines around his eyes and ink-stained fingers and the desk of a creature who had been managing the financial affairs of wizard families since before most of those families' current members were born. He looked at the blood check results for a long time. "The Potter account," he said finally, "has been under a custodianship order since the death of James and Lily Potter. Custodian designated as Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore." He paused. The custodianship was self-designated. There is no documentation of a prior Potter family request for this arrangement. Harry sat across the large desk in a chair that was significantly too big for him and kept his face very still. "Can it be revoked?" Sharpfong looked at him over steepled fingers. "By the account heir, upon proof of majority claim or demonstrated capability." He paused again, more significantly. "Or by activation of a hereditary magical inheritance that constitutes legal emancipation under the Gringotts Charter of 1692. Harry held up his right hand. The warmth in his palm steadied into something visible, not dramatic, not a blazing display, just the quiet, constant gold of a fire that knew what it was. Sharpfang was silent for a very long moment. "The Phoenix inheritance," he said. "We thought that line extinguished." He picked up a quill. "We will need to conduct a full lineage reading. This will take some time." "I have time," Harry said. "I don't have anywhere to be." Sharpfang looked at him, at the too large shirt, the slightly bent glasses, the calm, patient face of a 6-year-old who had come to Gringotts alone and had not been afraid of a single thing in the building. "No," the goblin said slowly. "I don't imagine you do." The lineage reading took 4 hours and produced a scroll that unrolled to approximately 6 feet of close-written text. Harry sat and read every word of it while Sharpfang waited with the particular patience of someone accustomed to working in centuries. The Potter estate was, as it turned out, considerably larger than the single vault in the upper tiers that Dumbledore's custodianship had kept accessible. There were family vaults going back 11 generations. There were properties in 3 countries. There was, buried in the lineage text, a footnote about the maternal line, Evans, née Dagworth Granger, née Ignis, and the nature of the Phoenix inheritance, last manifested in 1691 in one Helena Ignis, who had apparently set fire to the house of a man who had tried to buy her without asking and built herself a better one from the ashes. Harry thought he liked Helena Ignis. "The custodianship," Harry said, setting the scroll down. "I want it revoked. Today." "There will be legal implications," Sharpfang said. "Dumbledore will be notified." "Yes." Harry folded his hands on the desk, a gesture that looked strange on a 6-year-old but felt completely natural. "That's fine." Sharpfang looked at him for a long moment. Then the goblin did something Harry had not seen any of the other goblins do. He smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was the smile of a creature that had been waiting for someone to finally come in and ask the right questions. "There is one more thing," Sharpfang said, pulling out a second folder. "The Black family estate. The primary heir, Sirius Black, is currently incarcerated at Azkaban. However, the secondary heir designation," he opened the folder and rotated it so Harry could see. Harry read the name at the top of the document. "Read it again. Then read the date it had been filed, October 31st, 1981. The night his parents died. The night Sirius Black had gone after Peter Pettigrew and ended up in Azkaban without a trial. Filed by James Potter, 3 days before his death. Emergency provisions, to be activated if both James and Sirius were unavailable. Secondary magical guardian for one Harry James Potter. Name of designated guardian, Sirius Orion Black. Not Dumbledore. Never Dumbledore." Harry looked up. "Is there a way to submit a formal petition for review of an imprisonment without trial?" Sharpfang opened a drawer and placed a form on the desk. "We have been waiting," the goblin said carefully, "for someone with standing to ask that question for 5 years." Harry picked up the quill. Outside, through the thick marble walls of Gringotts, Diagon Alley carried on its afternoon business without any idea that the architecture of the past 5 years had just begun to come apart. The sun was getting lower over the leaky cauldron. Harry had a bus to catch. He wrote his name at the bottom of the petition with the small, clear handwriting of a child who had been practicing letters in the margins of Dudley's discarded schoolbooks. Then he stopped. He looked down at the signature. Harry James Potter. He thought about the vision Fawkes had shown him. About the old man standing in the rubble with the expression of a man completing a task. About the word sacrifice, floating in the vision like smoke. He thought about Helena Ignis, who had burned the house down and built something better. He signed his name again underneath the first one, more firmly. "I'll need copies of everything," he said. "In a warded document case. Something a goblin ward would make unreadable to any access attempt from outside." Sharpfang was already reaching for a case. "Done." Harry stood up, tucked the case under his arm, and looked around the office of Gringotts' head account manager with the expression of someone who has just completed the first move in a very long game. "Thank you," he said, and he meant it, and Sharp Fong heard both the meaning and the weight behind it. "Mr. Potter," Sharp Fong said, as Harry turned to leave. There was something in the goblin's voice, not quite warmth, but something adjacent to respect, given the way goblins understand respect, which is to say entirely on merit. "We are Gringotts. We deal in value." He paused. "We look forward to a long and profitable relationship." Harry looked back over his shoulder. The warmth in his hands had gone quiet again, settling to its constant, present hum. "So do I," he said. He got back to Privet Drive at 6:47 in the evening and found the garden exactly as he'd left it, which was tidy, and the house exactly as he'd found it that morning, which was hostile and humming with the particular silence of people waiting to be unpleasant. Uncle Vernon was in the living room with a face like a thundercloud. "Where have you been?" "Out," Harry said. He went to the kitchen and made himself a piece of toast, using the toaster, which he was technically not supposed to touch, and spread it with the good butter, which he was absolutely not supposed to touch, and ate it standing at the counter. Vernon appeared in the kitchen doorway. "I asked you a question, boy." Harry looked at him. Not up at him, not the slight, hunched posture of someone waiting to be shouted at, but at him, level and steady, with green eyes that had something in them that hadn't been there this morning. Vernon opened his mouth. Then closed it. He was not an imaginative man, but he was, somewhere under the bluster, an instinctive one, and the instinct that was speaking to him right now was the ancient, mammalian kind that recognizes a fire hazard. "You'll eat in the cupboard," he said, but with less certainty than usual. "No," Harry said, pleasantly, "I won't." The kitchen was very quiet. "I beg you won't put me in the cupboard anymore," Harry said, in the same tone. He took another bite of toast. "Or deny me meals. Or have Dudley hit me. I'm not asking, Uncle Vernon. I'm telling you how things are going to be from now on." He met Vernon's eyes. "It'll be better for both of us." There was a very long moment. The kitchen clock ticked. From the garden, a bird called once and then went quiet. Vernon Dursley stared at his 6-year-old nephew who was eating his good butter and looking back at him with eyes that had no fear in them at all, none, not a trace, not even the small survival fear that he'd always been able to count on, and felt something he would never in 1,000 years have admitted feeling. He went back to the living room. He didn't say anything to Petunia about it that night. But Harry was not put in the cupboard. He was not denied breakfast the next morning. And when Dudley tried to kick him under the table during lunch, Vernon, without looking up from his newspaper, said, "Dudley, don't," in a voice that meant it. Petunia watched Harry across the kitchen table for a long moment. Harry ate his lunch. That night, Fawkes came through the window as the clock downstairs struck 1, and settled on Harry's headboard, and sang a single quiet phrase that filled the dark room with warmth. Harry lay in his small bed with the Gringotts document case under his mattress and the ember burning steady in his chest, and looked up at the ceiling, and thought about everything that came next. There was a man in a prison in the North Sea who was supposed to be his godfather. There was an old man in a circular office who was going to be very surprised, very soon. There was a world out there that had been told a story about the boy who lived, a story written entirely by someone else. Harry had read the original, now. He knew how it was supposed to end. He was going to write a different one. Outside, in the summer dark, something shifted in the wards on the house, a slight recalibration, the way a ship's compass needle moves when the ship changes course. Subtle enough that anyone checking from the outside would see the same protections in place. But the direction had changed. Harry closed his eyes. The fire in his chest burned warm and certain and absolutely awake. Chapter 2, Ash and Argument. The thing about learning magic when you're 6 years old and your only teacher is a phoenix who communicates exclusively through music and symbolic gesture is that you get very good at working things out for yourself. Fawkes was not a patient teacher in the conventional sense. He didn't demonstrate something twice. He didn't correct technique with gentle encouragement. He would show Harry something once, a particular movement of heat through the air, a way of letting the warmth in his palms reach outward without forcing it, the specific quality of attention required to feel the magical threads in objects and spaces, and then he would wait. If Harry got it wrong, Fawkes would tilt his head in a way that communicated you already know what you did wrong, think about it, and Harry would think about it, and eventually he would get it right. It was, Harry reflected, probably the best teaching method for someone who needed to think independently. He suspected this was intentional. By the end of August he could do three things reliably. He could sustain the phoenix warmth in his hands without it fading or surging uncontrollably, he could feel magical wards and trace their structure the way a locksmith reads a lock, and he could, on good days, do the transformation thing, the leaf-to-gold trick, on small objects. He'd turned a dead beetle into something like amber, a cracked cup into uncracked, a page of Dudley's homework that Dudley had scrawled on carelessly into a clean page, which was arguably the most useful application so far. He couldn't fly yet. He could feel the shape of it, a potential in the inheritance, something that lived in his shoulder blades and the backs of his arms like an itch he couldn't quite reach, but Fawkes had communicated, through a series of very expressive tail feather arrangements, that this particular development would come when it came, and forcing it would be like trying to drag sunrise forward by pulling at the horizon. Harry accepted this. He was 6, not impatient. What he was methodical. He had a list. Not written down, he'd learned early that written plans were findable, but carried in his head with the precision of someone who had learned to treat memory as the only truly private space he had. First, establish financial independence and legal standing. Done. The Gringotts meeting had set that in motion. The petition for Sirius Black's case review had been filed. Sharp Fong had estimated 2 to 4 months for the ministry to be compelled to respond, assuming the filing was made through the proper Goblin legal channels that bypassed the standard ministry intake process. Second, build knowledge. He needed to understand the full landscape, the political structure of the wizarding world, the power players, who was loyal to Dumbledore and who was merely deferential, who had opposed Voldemort genuinely and who had done it conveniently. The kind of knowledge that let you move through a room knowing exactly who in it would sell you and for what price. For this he needed books. Real books, not the sanitized history taught at wizarding primary schools. He needed primary sources. The document case from Gringotts had included, at Sharpfang's quiet suggestion, a complimentary membership card for the restricted section of Flourish and Blots. Apparently Potter family members had historically been given this as a standard account perk, though the membership had gone unactivated for 6 years under Dumbledore's custodianship. Harry had, over the next 3 months, made 7 more trips to Diagon Alley. He was getting very good at the number 7 bus. September rolled into October, and October into November, and November into a wet, grey December, and the Dursleys' house settled into a new equilibrium that nobody in it fully understood but nobody actively disrupted. Vernon had a way of not looking directly at Harry that suggested a man who has decided the most sensible response to something inexplicable is to pretend it falls outside his jurisdiction. Petunia occasionally left food out that was better than she needed to, an extra biscuit here, a glass of juice there, with the studied casualness of someone who would deny doing it if asked. Dudley, who was not bright but had excellent self-preservation instincts, had stopped trying to hit Harry entirely after the one occasion when Harry had looked at him with those flat green eyes and Dudley's shoe had come untied at exactly the wrong moment and he tripped over the garden hose and ended up in the rose bed. Harry hadn't done that on purpose. Probably. He spent the evenings reading. The books he'd acquired from Flourish and Blot's restricted section were extraordinary in the way that genuinely dangerous knowledge is always extraordinary, not because they were full of dark magic, but because they were full of true history. The Politics of the Wizengamot, 1900 to present was dry but essential. Bloodlines and Their Bindings, a comprehensive study of hereditary magic had a full chapter on Phoenix inheritances, including the Ignis line, which Harry read 4 times. Azkaban, the history and jurisprudence of magical imprisonment made his stomach turn, but he read it all the way through and made a mental note of every procedural irregularity that Sirius Black's case represented. There were 11. 11 separate points at which someone should have stopped the process and insisted on a trial. Every single one of them had been bypassed with a signature or a note from Dumbledore. He started a second list in his head. The one that surprised him most was a slim volume he'd found shelved between two larger texts as if someone had put it there by accident. The Prophecy Registry, Sealed and Unsealed Records, 1900 to 1980 by Bathilda Bagshot, self-published in 1981. It shouldn't have been in restricted, it was dry and academic, but someone had clearly moved it there at some point, and Harry suspected he knew who. He found the entry for his prophecy on page 312. It was brief. It gave the date, the location, a pub called the Hog's Head in Hogsmeade, and a partial transcript that had been sealed by the Department of Mysteries. But Bagshot, meticulous historian that she was, had included a footnote. It should be noted that this prophecy was partially overheard by an individual who then reported it to the Dark Lord Voldemort. The identity of this individual was known to the recording seer, Sybil Trelawney, but sealed at the request of Albus Dumbledore on the grounds of protection of a confidential source. The author notes, with considerable reservation, that the practice of sealing witness identities in prophecy records is highly unusual and has no precedent in the prior 80 years of registry records. Harry sat with this for a long time. Someone had told Voldemort about the prophecy. Dumbledore knew who. Dumbledore had sealed it. He added this to the second list. The letter from Gringotts arrived on the 14th of December. It came via a very small owl that appeared at the kitchen window just as Harry was making himself breakfast. He cooked his own now, and Petunia had stopped objecting after the morning he'd made proper scrambled eggs and left a portion for her without comment and she'd eaten them, and dropped a sealed parchment envelope into his hand before departing with the efficiency of a courier who had other deliveries. Harry sat at the kitchen table and read it. The ministry had responded to the petition. They had not, as Harry had half expected, ignored it or dismissed it or buried it in procedural delays. They had responded because they had been legally compelled to buy a provision of the Gringotts Charter that the ministry's legal department had apparently spent 3 weeks trying to find a way around before accepting they couldn't. The response was not a release order. That would have been too much to hope for yet. But it was an acknowledgement of irregularity, formal, bureaucratic language that nonetheless clearly stated that Sirius Orion Black had been incarcerated without trial in violation of standard procedure and that a formal review was being initiated. The review would be conducted by the Department of Magical Law Enforcement. The head of that department was Madame Amelia Bones. Harry didn't know that name yet. But Sharpfang's letter, accompanying the ministry response, included a single line about Bones that told him everything he needed to know. She is, in our considerable experience, one of the very few ministry officials who reads the documents placed in front of her before she signs them. High praise, from a goblin. Harry folded both letters and tucked them into the document case, and thought about his next move. He needed to write to Amelia Bones. He needed to do it carefully, because a letter from a 6-year-old claiming that Dumbledore had manipulated a false imprisonment was the kind of letter that would either be acted upon with great seriousness or filed in the drawer labeled unhinged correspondence depending entirely on how it was written. He needed it to be specific, cited, and unignorable. He spent 4 days drafting it in his head. Then he sat down and wrote it in 1 hour and 40 minutes, and it was 3 pages long and contained 11 itemized points of procedural irregularity, all properly referenced to their relevant statutes, and it was signed Harry James Potter, heir to the ancient and most noble house of Potter, filed through Gringotts Bank on behalf of the designated guardianship right of Sirius Orion Black. He sent it with the Gringotts owl the next morning and then went back inside and ate his breakfast and got on with his day. Christmas came and went. The Dursleys went to Marge's again. Harry stayed home, made himself an excellent Christmas dinner from the contents of the fridge, and spent the evening reading a thoroughly fascinating account of Goblin Wars that he suspected he would find useful someday. Fawkes came on Christmas night, which felt deliberate, and sang something that was absolutely not a carol but had the warmth of one. Harry sat by the window with his knees pulled up and listened and felt the ember in his chest respond like a second voice joining a song. "Do you miss him?" Harry asked. Fawkes made a sound that was complicated. "Not denial. Not simple yes. Something that said, I miss who he was, and who he was is not who he is now, and I am not sure those are the same person or whether they ever were. How long have you known about his plan? Harry asked. The real one. The part where I die at the end. Fawkes was quiet for a long moment. Then he sang a single phrase, low and heavy, and Harry felt it in his ribs. Years, Harry translated. You've known for years. The bird turned its head away, toward the window and the cold dark garden. You came when I turned 6, Harry said. Not accusatory. Just working through it. Why then? Why not before? Fawkes turned back. The ancient eyes blinked. Then he lifted one wing and held it out, and Harry leaned forward and the vision came again, not the full landscape of manipulation he'd seen on the first night, but a single image, small and specific. Harry himself, asleep in the cupboard, at maybe age 4. The ember warmth in the sleeping child's chest was there, but dim, buried, like a coal covered in ash. And then, 2 years later, the same child, after a particular day, Harry recognized it, a day in August when Uncle Vernon had been particularly awful for reasons that were wholly Vernon's problem, and the ember had flared, just for a moment, bright and reaching. Like a signal fire. I felt it when you were ready, Fawkes was saying. I came when you could use what I brought. Harry sat back. That's either very wise or very convenient. Fawkes ruffled his feathers in a way that somehow communicated those two things are not mutually exclusive. Harry laughed. It was a real laugh, not the polite social sound, a short, genuine burst that surprised him slightly. Fawkes' tail feathers rose and settled like a pleased cat. Right, Harry said. What next? Fawkes looked at him steadily. Then he did something new. He stretched out his neck and very lightly touched his beak to the center of Harry's chest, to the ember warmth, and held it there for 3 seconds. Harry felt something unlock. Not a dramatic unlocking. Not a flood of power or a blaze of fire. More like a door that had been slightly ajar suddenly being opened all the way. He could feel the inheritance more clearly now, its full shape. The warmth in his hands was connected to something larger, a capability he'd felt the edges of but not the center. He reached for it carefully, the way you'd reach for something hot with proper respect for what it was. His body felt, briefly, like it wanted to be something other than what it was. Harry breathed through it. Not yet, he said aloud, to the inheritance, to himself, to the possibility. Not yet. But soon. Fawkes made a sound of agreement and pulled back, and the feeling settled, and Harry sat in the dark on Christmas night feeling more completely and precisely himself than he had ever felt in his 6 years, 8 months, and 3 days of life. Amelia Bones' response came in January. It was not a letter. It was a ministry official's formal response document, sealed with the DMLE crest, and it was 3 pages long and very careful and very measured, and between the careful, measured lines Harry could read the genuine shock of a woman who had looked at the serious black file and found it extraordinary in the worst possible way. She confirmed the 11 irregularities. She added 4 more that Harry had missed. She noted that the original arrest report carried a signature she was being careful not to name in writing but that Harry could infer easily enough. She stated that a formal review hearing was being scheduled for March and that, given the unusual circumstances of the case, she was requesting the presence of a witness representative from Gringotts. At the very bottom, below the formal close, in handwriting that was slightly different from the rest of the document, smaller, more personal, added after the official text had been completed, was a single line, I would very much like to know how a 6-year-old came to be the person filing this petition. I think that conversation would be instructive for both of us. Harry read that line twice. Then he got a fresh piece of parchment. Dear Madam Bones, he wrote. I think so too. I suggest we meet somewhere that isn't your office. He sent it. She responded within 2 days. They agreed on a tea shop in Diagon Alley on a Thursday in February, and Harry took the number 7 bus and arrived before she did and ordered tea and a scone because Sharp Fong had told him in their last meeting that Gringotts clients of account holder standing always ordered something and never paid less than the full price, and it was a principle worth living by. Amelia Bones was a broad, solid woman with a monocle and the haircut of someone who had decided decades ago that hair was not a significant concern. She walked into the tea shop with the authority of someone accustomed to rooms reorganizing themselves around her presence, spotted Harry immediately, and sat down across from him with the expression of a woman who has done many surprising things in her career and is genuinely uncertain where this one ranks. She looked at him for a moment. He looked back. "You wrote that letter," she said. It wasn't a question. Yes. The statutory citations were correct. I know. You're 6. Nearly 7, Harry said. The scones are good. She ordered one. There was a brief silence while the tea arrived, and Madame Bones adjusted her monocle and looked at him with the thoroughness of a woman who had built her career on reading people accurately. "The serious black case," she said. "Tell me what you know and how you came to know it." Harry had thought about this conversation at length. He had decided, after much consideration, that Amelia Bones was either trustworthy or she wasn't, and that the best way to find out was to be honest and watch what she did with it. People who were going to betray you generally didn't do it better when you gave them less information. They did it regardless. So he told her. Not everything, not Fawkes, not the Phoenix inheritance, not the full scope of what he'd seen in the visions. But the Gringotts documents, yes. The guardianship filing, yes. The 15 procedural irregularities, yes. The sealed testimony in the prophecy records, yes. The secondary heir designation that had been filed by his father 3 days before his death and never acted upon. Bones listened without interrupting. She ate her scone in 3 clean bites. She refilled her own tea. Her face went through several expressions that she mostly kept controlled, but Harry caught the one that surfaced briefly when he mentioned the guardianship, a fast, cold, specific anger, there and gone. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. The individual whose testimony was sealed in the prophecy records, she said carefully. You have a theory about who that is. I have a strong deduction, Harry said. Based on who knew about the prophecy, who had reason to tell Voldemort, and whose continued safety would provide sufficient motivation for Dumbledore to seal the record. Bones looked at him over her monocle. You're going to be either very effective or very dangerous. Both, Harry said. Probably. The corner of her mouth moved. Not quite a smile. Something that recognized itself in something else. The review hearing is set for the 4th of March. The Wisengamot panel will want witnesses. I cannot compel anyone to testify. She paused. I can, however, ensure that the procedural record is so thoroughly documented that testimony becomes less relevant than the paperwork. That would be helpful, Harry said. There will be resistance, Bones said flatly. The moment this hearing becomes public knowledge, there will be significant pressure from certain quarters to slow it down or redirect it. I know, Harry said. Is there anything I can do to help prevent that? Bones looked at him steadily. You can stay out of public view for as long as possible. The moment it becomes known that Harry Potter is involved in this, it stops being a legal case and starts being a political spectacle. She paused. Can you do that? Harry considered this. For now, he said. Not indefinitely. No, Bones said. Not indefinitely. She folded her hands on the table. When it does become public, and it will, how do you want to handle it? Harry thought about this for a moment that was slightly longer than it looked from the outside. He was thinking about the second list. About what Dumbledore would do when the situation became visible to him. About the various levers and countermoves available to a man who had spent 15 years building an architecture of control. I want to be standing somewhere very solid before it does, Harry said. Bones nodded once. Then I suggest we move quickly. They parted outside the tea shop with a handshake, Bones' hand large and firm, Harry's small but steady, and Bones walked away with the particular stride of a woman who has just added something significant to her to-do list, and Harry went back down the alley toward the leaky cauldron and thought about solid ground. March came in wet and cold, and the review hearing for Sirius Black was held in the smallest of the Wisengamot's hearing chambers on a grey Tuesday morning. Harry was not present. He had sent a statement through Gringotts that was read into the record by Sharp Fong in person, which was unusual enough that several Wisengamot members visibly reacted to the goblin's presence. Sharp Fong appeared to enjoy their discomfort. Harry was at home reading Advanced Transfiguration Theory, a study in permanent and semi-permanent transformation when Fawkes appeared on his windowsill mid-afternoon with an energy Harry had learned to recognize as urgent. He set down the book. What happened? Fawkes' trill was fast and complicated. Harry parsed it slowly. Something had gone wrong, not catastrophically, not a disaster, but a wrench in the mechanism. Someone had moved against the hearing. Not blocked it entirely, but introduced a complication. Dumbledore? Harry asked. Fawkes made a sound that was adjacent to yes. What did he do? The bird showed him in the vision touch, a brief image of the hearing chamber, a note delivered mid-proceeding, a procedural challenge filed. The challenge claimed that the original arrest, while irregular, had been conducted under emergency wartime powers that superseded standard procedure, and that reviewing it now constituted a retroactive challenge to wartime ministry authority. It was, Harry had to admit, a competent move. It didn't kill the case. But it introduced enough complexity to slow the proceeding and move the final decision to a full Wisengamot vote rather than a DMLE review board. Harry thought for a moment. A full Wisengamot vote was harder to control than a DMLE review. Harder for Bones, but also harder for Dumbledore. 50-odd members, some of whom had personal stakes in wartime decisions being reviewed, some of whom were genuinely interested in justice, some of whom could be reasoned with. He pulled out a fresh piece of parchment. He wrote 3 letters. One to Sharp Fong, adjusting the legal strategy to account for the new development. One to Amelia Bones, with 3 specific suggestions for how to approach the Wisengamot vote that drew on what he'd read in the Politics of the Wisengamot, 1900 to present. And one that he sat looking at the blank parchment for before he wrote it. The 3rd letter was to the Daily Prophet. He didn't send it yet. He drafted it and folded it and put it in the document case. It was insurance. It was the moment when the quiet maneuvering became something public and irreversible, and he wasn't ready for that yet. But he was getting there. April was when Dumbledore noticed. Harry had been expecting this. He'd been surprised, honestly, that it had taken this long, but then he considered the architecture again, the way the old man had constructed his plan, and realized that a passive surveillance system was only as good as the anomalies it was built to flag. Dumbledore's monitoring of Harry's situation had been designed around a specific expected pattern, a quiet, overlooked boy, growing up small and grateful, no significant magical activity, wards intact. Harry had been careful to maintain the outward shape of that pattern. He'd been very careful about the wards. He'd kept his movements discreet. But there were limits to how long you could file documents with Gringotts, meet with the head of the DMLE, and correspond regularly with the ministry before something twitched in someone's monitoring network. The first sign was subtle. Harry felt it in the wards, a slight change in their resonance, a new thread introduced, something that hadn't been there before. Finer than the standard Dumbledore-placed protections. A listening spell, woven into the background noise of the existing magic with considerable skill. Harry traced it for 2 days before he was sure of what it was. Then he left it exactly where it was and adjusted his behavior accordingly, not stopping anything, but moving certain conversations and certain letters outside the range of the ward's sensitivity, which he'd mapped precisely. Let Dumbledore hear what he needed to hear. The fact that the old man was listening was itself useful information. The second sign was less subtle. A woman named Arabella Figg, who lived 4 doors down, knocked on the door of number 4 in the second week of April and asked Petunia if Harry might want to come and visit her cats that afternoon. Harry, who had been expecting something like this, observed Petunia's reaction carefully. His aunt knew the woman, they'd clearly spoken before. Petunia's face did something complicated, some internal negotiation between the genuine desire to be rid of Harry for an afternoon and a wariness she couldn't name. "Go on, then," Petunia said to Harry, in the kitchen, with the particular tone of someone doing something they're not entirely sure about. Harry considered declining. Then he decided that more information was always better than less, and he wanted to see what the woman's brief was. He went. Mrs. Figg's house smelled overwhelmingly of cats and slightly of cabbage, and Mrs. Figg herself was a small, faded woman with the worn look of someone who had been doing something difficult for a long time without acknowledgement. She settled Harry on a flowery sofa with a cat called Mr. Tibbles and offered him a biscuit that was slightly stale, and then sat across from him and tried to make conversation. Harry waited. "About 20 minutes in, Mrs. Figg said, very carefully, you know, dear, there are people in this world who keep an eye on children in your situation. Just to make sure you're all right." "I know," Harry said pleasantly. Mrs. Figg blinked. "Do you report to Dumbledore?" Harry said. Same pleasant tone. "Have done for years. You're a squib, which is why you can be placed in a Muggle neighborhood without triggering any magical detection. You send your reports, how often?" "Monthly, I'd guess, and you note whether I seem healthy and whether anything unusual has happened, and you report back." He ate the stale biscuit. "What specifically triggered the report that led to this visit?" Mrs. Figg stared at him. She was not a bad person. Harry had worked this out in the first 10 minutes. She was a person who had been given a role she believed was benevolent and had performed it faithfully without asking too many questions about the larger picture. The slight flinch when he mentioned the reporting, quick, defensive, told him that she'd had doubts and suppressed them. "I don't want to get you in trouble," she said, which was not a denial. "I'm not in trouble," Harry said. "But I appreciate you saying that." He looked at her steadily. "Mrs. Figg, when Dumbledore asks what you observed today, what are you going to tell him?" She was quiet for a moment. Then, slowly, "That you seemed perfectly normal." Quiet. "Nothing unusual." Harry nodded. "That's kind of you." "Is it?" she said, and the question carried a weight she hadn't intended to let out. Harry looked at her for a moment. He thought about what to say. He decided on honesty, because he'd found it was almost always more useful than strategy with people who were fundamentally decent. "He kept me with the Dursleys on purpose," Harry said. "Knowing what they were like. He needed me to grow up a certain way." He said it without anger, without drama, just laying it out. "I don't think you knew that." Mrs. Figg went still. "I'm not trying to make you do anything," Harry said. "I'm just asking you to consider what you're serving." He finished the biscuit and thanked her for the visit with genuine politeness and went back to number 4, and that evening he wrote a note that he left unaddressed and unsent, because he thought Mrs. Figg might come to her own conclusions without any further prompting, and that would ultimately mean more than anything he could arrange. May was when Fawkes gave him the next piece. It was late evening, the trees outside Harry's window fully leafed out now, the summer beginning its slow assembly. Fawkes had been restless for several nights, not agitated, but alert in a way that made Harry pay attention. He'd felt something building in the bond between them, something Fawkes was working toward in the same way Harry sometimes worked toward a difficult realization, circling it, checking the angles, making sure he had it right before he spoke it. On the third night, Fawkes settled on the headboard directly above Harry's head and sang. It was a longer song than usual. It moved through several keys, the way a piece of music moves through emotions, beginning in something that sounded like searching, moving through something that felt like grief, and arriving at something that was not quite hope but was the territory directly next to it. Harry lay still and listened with his whole chest. When it ended, he sat up. "What was that?" he asked. Fawkes touched the side of his beak to Harry's temple, and the vision came. It was different from the manipulation architecture he'd seen on the first night. This was older. A woman he didn't recognize, centuries back, with red hair and green eyes, Helena Ignis, his many times great ancestor, standing in a garden somewhere continental and warm, holding a phoenix egg. Not Fawkes specifically. Just an egg, huge and warm and faintly iridescent. The scene shifted forward. The egg hatched. The bird that emerged was small and bright and entirely new, and Helena had held it in her cupped hands with an expression that was the opposite of the old man's chess piece expression. This was recognition, this was you, this was the specific joy of something that knows itself. The vision shifted again and again, flashing through generations, the inheritance passing down, sometimes manifesting fully and sometimes dormant, sometimes skipping generations entirely, always present in the bloodline, waiting. And then it arrived at a woman in a Muggle world, marrying a Muggle man, the Phoenix inheritance submerged under generations of dormancy but never gone. A daughter born and a daughter's daughter. Lily Evans. Lily, who had never known. Harry felt that sit in his chest. His mother had carried this. Had never known. Had died without knowing that the warmth she'd presumably always felt, in her hands, in her chest, the specific comfort of fire used gently, was centuries of something that had been waiting to surface again. It had surfaced in him. The vision showed him one more thing. A new image, not historical. Something else. A boy about Harry's age, thick-set and round-faced, growing up in a different house with a different sad and overlooked shape to him. The vision lingered on this boy's hands. Harry looked at the hands. Then he looked more carefully. There was no fire. But there was something, a green-silver shimmer, present and dormant, like moonlight under ice. Who is that? Harry asked. Fawkes sang a phrase that felt like a name, not quite translatable but clearly someone specific and important, and then he showed Harry the boy again standing in a garden pulling weeds with the resigned competence of someone who has been told they're not magical enough to matter. He has an inheritance too, Harry said slowly. A different one. Fawkes Trill confirmed this. And nobody knows. The bird made the sound that meant no, and this is a problem. Harry lay back down and stared at the ceiling. He thought about another overlooked child in another insufficient house. He thought about the prophecy, born as the seventh month dies, born to those who have thrice defied him, and Bathilda Bagshot's careful note about a second candidate. He thought about the wizarding world's habit of looking at the more dramatic option and missing the quieter one standing right next to it. I'll find him, Harry said. When I get to Hogwarts. Fawkes made a satisfied sound. 2 more years, Harry said. 2 more years of preparation. 2 more years of building the foundation before he walked into a school that Dumbledore ran and into a world that had already written his story for him. 2 years to be so thoroughly and solidly himself before someone tried to make him into something else. It didn't feel like a long time. It felt like exactly enough. He fell asleep with the ember warm in his chest and the ghost of Fawkes' last note still hanging in the air, and dreamed of fire used for making things rather than destroying them, houses built from ash, wings that carried rather than caged, a world that had room in it for people who refused to be weapons. The summer before Hogwarts, on a warm evening in July, Harry sat in the small garden of No. 4, Privet Drive, reading a book about ancient magical bloodlines, when the ward on the house changed. Not the listening thread Dumbledore had added. Something else. Something older. A new presence at the edge of the ward structure, feeling its way around the boundary with the careful, respectful touch of something that had been told proceed with caution. Harry looked up from his book. At the garden gate, a barn owl was sitting with a letter in its beak. An official-looking letter, large and cream-colored, sealed with a crest. He knew what it was. He'd known it was coming. He set down his book, walked to the gate, and took the letter from the owl, which departed immediately as if it had somewhere important to be. He stood in the late evening light and turned the envelope over in his hands. Mr. H. Potter, the second bedroom, 4, Privet Drive, Little Whinging, Surrey. He noted the bedroom specification. He noted what it used to say, he'd heard, from Mrs. Figg, that in the first few years it had said the cupboard under the stairs. He noted that someone, somewhere, had updated the address. He opened the letter. Dear Mr. Potter, we are pleased to inform you that you have a place at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Harry read through the standard text and the supply list, and then he set it on the garden wall and looked at it in the evening light, the ember warm and steady in his chest, the phoenix inheritance a solid, real, awake presence in every cell of him. He had 2 months. He thought about what he still needed to do. The Sirius situation was moving. The Wisengamot vote had been pushed to September, which was frustrating but manageable. His Gringotts standing was established. His knowledge base was as thorough as 2 years of focused reading could make it. He thought about the boy with the green-silver shimmer in his hands who didn't know what he was. He thought about Dumbledore, who would be waiting at Hogwarts with a plan that Harry had already read from cover to cover. He thought about the Philosopher's Stone, which Fawkes had shown him in passing, a vault in Hogwarts, dangerously placed, obviously a trap for something or someone. He'd been thinking about that one for a while. He picked up the Hogwarts letter, tucked it into the book as a bookmark, and went inside. He had letters to write. He had 2 months and a lot to arrange. The boy who had been told his whole story before he was old enough to read it sat down at the kitchen table and started planning the next chapter entirely on his own terms. Outside, at the very edge of the ward's reach, something that might have been an old man's magical monitoring system registered a quiet pulse of phoenix warmth from inside number 4, Privet Drive, and sent a signal to a circular office in Scotland that arrived as a gentle chime from a silver instrument on the corner of a desk. The old man looked at the instrument for a long moment. Then he reached for a different instrument, one shaped like a small set of scales, and watched it tip slightly, almost imperceptibly, in a direction it had never tipped before. His expression, alone in the office, was the expression of someone who has been playing chess for 15 years against an opponent they thought wasn't there yet, and has just realized that the opponent has been sitting across the board all along. He sat back in his chair. Extraordinary, he said, and he did not mean it as a compliment. Chapter 3, The Man in Azkaban. The North Sea in October was the kind of cold that had opinions about you. Harry had read about Azkaban in the jurisprudence book from Flourish and Blots, had read it carefully, multiple times, underlining nothing because he didn't underline books but remembering everything because that was a skill he'd been developing since age 6 with considerable motivation. He knew the location, a small, black rock island approximately 12 miles off the northeastern coast of Scotland. He knew the structure, a fortress built in the 15th century by a wizard who had subsequently gone mad, which Harry felt said something meaningful about the building's character. He knew about the Dementors, soul-consuming creatures bound to the island by ministry agreement, used as guards because they were cheap and thorough and required no salary. He knew, most importantly, that Sirius Black was in the highest security wing on the uppermost floor, in a cell that had been specifically reinforced after Sirius had allegedly blown a street full of muggles apart with a single curse. Harry also knew that this crime had almost certainly not happened the way the record stated, that the actual perpetrator had escaped, and that Sirius had been so consumed with grief and shock in the immediate aftermath that he'd laughed at the scene until the Aurors arrived, which had been interpreted as the laughter of a madman rather than of a man who had just watched his best friend fake his own death and frame him for the murder. Harry thought about that a lot. The specific awfulness of it, that grief could look like guilt if you caught it at the wrong angle. He was 8 now. He had been planning this particular move for 14 months. The Wisengamot vote on Sirius's case had happened in September and had gone, in technical terms, in the right direction, a formal declaration of irregular imprisonment, but not far enough in practical terms, which was to say that Sirius was still in Azkaban while the Ministry discussed what to do about it. Ministry discussions about politically inconvenient situations could, Harry had learned, take anywhere between 6 months and a geological age. Amelia Bones was working the problem from inside, but she was working against considerable friction. Harry had decided to stop waiting. He had spent the last 3 months preparing specifically for this. He'd read everything available about Dementors, their history, their limitations, the specific magical principles that governed their effect on humans. Cold, despair, the forced reliving of worst memories, all of it was a function of proximity and the Dementor's active feeding. The key detail, buried in a footnote in a very old text about binding magical creatures, was that Dementors were fundamentally reactive to emotional warmth. Not just happy thoughts, that was a simplification for the Patronus charm. Genuine, steady warmth. The kind that wasn't performing happiness but simply was, the way a fire doesn't perform heat. Harry had a fire in his chest that had been burning steadily for 2 years. He had tested it. In September, he tracked down a Dementor that had apparently wandered off schedule near Aberdeen. It happened occasionally, the DMLE reports noted with the resigned tone of a department accustomed to its security measures having off days, and he'd gone to where it was and stood 50 feet from it in a field and simply breathed. The cold had come, yes. The edges of his worst memories, the green light, the Dursleys at their worst, the vision of Dumbledore choosing his death, had pressed against him. He'd felt them. He hadn't pushed them away. He'd let them sit alongside the ember warmth and found, with genuine interest, that they couldn't extinguish it. They were cold, those memories. The warmth was warmer. The Dementor had approached to 30 feet. Then 20. Then it had stopped. It had stood in the field making the rattling sound they made, and Harry had stood there making no sound at all, and after approximately 90 seconds the Dementor had turned around and gone back the way it came. Harry had noted this in his mental file under confirmed and gone home. He was not performing confidence. He genuinely was not afraid. This was, he had come to understand, partly the inheritance and partly just who he was. The Dursleys had used fear as a management tool for 6 years and had managed to produce not a fearful child but a child who had learned to look at frightening things and assess them for what they actually were rather than for what they were threatening to be. Fawkes was going to take him to Azkaban. This was the part that had required the most preparation. Phoenix fire travel, which was different from flu or apparition, operating on a different principle entirely, burning through space rather than folding it, was something Fawkes had been carefully teaching him the theory of for months. Not how to do it himself yet, that was a development several years out at minimum. But how to travel with Fawkes. How to be carried by Phoenix fire without flinching away from the heat, because flinching was what caused the disorientation people described after emergency Phoenix rescues. You had to be willing to be briefly, completely fire. Harry was willing. The plan was simple because complicated plans had more failure points. They would arrive on the island. Harry would handle the Dementors. Fawkes would locate Sirius, Phoenix perception cut through magical interference that would stop any other tracking method. Harry would get Sirius out of the cell. Fawkes would take them both back. The question of what to do with Sirius once he was out had been the subject of considerable thought. Taking him to Privet Drive was not viable, Dumbledore's monitoring on that location was too dense. Harry had, through Gringotts, identified a Potter property in the Scottish Highlands that had been sitting empty for 6 years under a maintenance charm, warded independently of any other Potter estate, with no connection to any address on record with the ministry. He'd arranged for the wards to be refreshed quietly, with new access permissions filed only through Gringotts' internal records. It wasn't a permanent solution. Sirius needed to be cleared openly, legally, publicly. But it was a safe place to start. He'd packed a bag the night before, food, because Sirius had been in Azkaban for 7 years and Harry had read what that did to a person's body and wanted to be practical about it, a letter from Sharpfong confirming the legal situation and the groundwork already laid, a spare wand, a very interesting acquisition, the story of which involved a visit to Ollivanders that Ollivander himself had been instructed not to record, which he'd agreed to with the expression of a man deeply interested in seeing what happened next. The wand was a backup, unused, for a man who had been without one for 7 years. He was as ready as he could be. Fawkes came at 2 in the morning on the 14th of October. Not through the window this time. The bird appeared in the center of the room, simply there between one breath and the next, trailing gold fire that cast no shadows and made no sound. His eyes were very bright and very focused and his whole bearing communicated the particular quality of attention that meant we are doing something significant tonight. Harry was already dressed. He picked up the bag and slung it over one shoulder and looked at Fawkes. "Ready," he said. Fawkes spread his wings. The fire travel lasted, subjectively, approximately 3 seconds, during which Harry experienced the sensation of being briefly, completely dispersed, not painfully, but thoroughly, like a word spoken into a very large room, and then reassembled with some force into the cold, salt-lashed dark of the North Sea. They were on a rock ledge approximately 20 feet above the waterline. Below them, black water heaved against the island's base. Above them, the fortress rose in a mass of dark stone and darker architecture, its narrow windows like closed eyes. The sky was overcast and the October wind was the kind that found every gap in your clothing and settled in with territorial intent. Harry stood still for a moment and let his awareness spread outward. He could feel the Dementors immediately, not through sight or sound but through a specific emotional pressure, the way you feel a headache building before it arrives. They were everywhere. Dozens of them, moving through the fortress in slow, purposeless patterns. He breathed in. The ember in his chest expanded steadily in response to the cold, the way a fire draws air when a window opens. He felt it move through him, not in his hands now, but everywhere, steady and warm and entirely present. "Let's go," he said quietly. The gates of Azkaban, which were massive and iron and very much locked, presented less of an obstacle than intended because Harry had no intention of engaging with them as locks. He looked at the iron, traced the ward structure around it, found the specific thread that governed the entrance barrier and, with the careful precision of a boy who had been unpicking ward structure since age 6, loosened it from the inside out. The gate swung open. He walked in. The first Dementor came around a corner 30 seconds after Harry entered the main corridor. It was taller than he'd expected, even having read the descriptions, nearly 8 feet, wrapped in a kind of darkness that wasn't just absence of light but active consumption of it. It moved with the specific wrongness of something that doesn't experience the world the way living things do, floating 3 inches above the stone floor. Harry stopped walking. The Dementor drifted toward him. The cold was immediate and comprehensive. His breath fogged. His fingers numbed. At the edges of his vision, the gray corridor got grayer, the stones blurring into the specific visual quality of deep depression. He felt the memories pressing, the green light, the cupboard, the vision of himself walking toward a death that had been planned for him before he could walk. He stood in it. He let it be cold. The ember in his chest was warm. He didn't produce a Patronus. He didn't need to. He just looked at the Dementor with his green eyes and felt, actively and deliberately, the warmth that was genuinely present in him, not performed happiness but the real kind, the fire in the chest kind, the kind that had been there when Fawkes first touched his forehead and shown him that he was seen, and there when Sharp Fong had smiled his sharp goblin smile, and there when Amelia Bones had shaken his hand with the serious respect of someone who had just met an equal. The Dementor stopped advancing. Its rattle changed pitch. Harry watched it make the adjustment with genuine curiosity, the way you'd watch an interesting natural phenomenon. The creature was reacting to the warmth the way the Aberdeen Dementor had, with confusion, because warmth in Azkaban was not in its operational expectations. Harry stepped forward. The Dementor stepped back. He kept walking. The Dementor moved out of his path entirely. He walked through the corridors of Azkaban the way he walked through most situations, purposefully and without performance, the warmth in him creating a radius of clearance around him that the Dementors retreated from as he approached. 2 more came around corners. Both moved aside. One of them made a sound that he interpreted, with interest, as something close to distress, and he felt a flicker of something complicated about that. He had no love for Dementors, but they were creatures following their nature, not genuinely malevolent. He filed this under think about later. Fawkes was ahead of him, barely visible, a golden warmth moving through the dark with the certainty of something that always knows where it is. The upper floor was the worst. The cells up here were smaller and the Dementor presence denser, and the magical interference from the reinforced walls created a pressure that would have been disorienting to any ordinary compass or tracking spell. Harry felt it as a kind of static against his awareness, but the bond thread between him and Fawkes cut through it cleanly. Fawkes stopped outside a cell door at the end of the corridor. Harry stood before it. The door was solid iron, warded with 3 separate locking charms, a sealing enchantment, and, he noticed this with cold interest, something additional, something personal, something that carried a distinctive magical signature he'd felt before in the wards of Privet Drive. Dumbledore's signature. He stared at this for a moment. An additional personal ward on one specific cell in Azkaban, placed by a man who had presided over the irregular imprisonment of the man in that cell. The implications of this were numerous and none of them were good, and he added it to the second list with particular emphasis before reaching forward and unpicking all 5 layers of the door's security with steady, methodical focus. The door opened. The smell was the first thing. Old, closed in, the specific staleness of a space that had not had fresh air in years. Harry breathed through his mouth and stepped inside. Sirius Black was in the far corner of the cell. Harry had prepared himself for this, had read what Azkaban did, but reading and seeing were different activities. Sirius Black had been, according to the photographs in the files Sharp Fong had pulled, a handsome man at 21. He was 28 now, and the arithmetic of 7 years in a Dementor-patrolled cell had produced something that looked considerably older. He was thin in the way that suggested not just hunger but the kind of extended deprivation that changes the structure of a person. His dark hair was long and matted. His eyes, when they opened in the faint phoenix light, were the color of old storms. Those eyes looked at Harry, and then at Fawkes, and then at Harry again. "You're real," Sirius said. His voice was rough from disuse, but the cadence of it was still there, something that had once been quick and warm and was still recognizable as such under the damage. "Tell me you're real." "I'm real," Harry said. Sirius stopped. His eyes were moving over Harry's face with the intensity of someone reading something they'd memorized from a different angle. "James," he said, and then immediately, "No." Lily's eyes. He stopped again. Something was happening in his face, complicated and involuntary. "Harry." "Yes," Harry said. He set the bag down and opened it and took out the food first, bread, cheese, a small flask of water, and held it out without ceremony because ceremony wasn't what was needed right now. "Eat something. We need to move soon." Sirius stared at the food. Then at Harry. The storm-colored eyes were doing something that had nothing to do with Dementors, something purely human, something that had been kept very small and very contained for 7 years and was attempting, with great difficulty, to exist again. He took the bread. He ate it in the way of someone who has learned not to rush eating because rushing was a luxury that implied reliability of supply. Harry watched and didn't comment. "How?" Sirius said, between bites. "Long story," Harry said. "Short version, Gringotts, a petition, a DMLE investigation, and about 2 years of preparation." He paused. "I know you were innocent. I know about Peter Pettigrew. I know about the custody designation my father filed." Sirius went very still. "I'm working on getting you cleared officially," Harry said. "That's in progress and it will happen. But the ministry is moving at ministry speed and you've been here long enough." He looked at his godfather steadily. "I thought you deserved to breathe air that doesn't smell like this." Something happened in Sirius's face that Harry looked away from, not because it made him uncomfortable but because some things are private and Sirius Black deserved privacy for this one. He gave it 30 seconds. "Then, there's a property in the Highlands. It's warded, it's safe, it's not connected to any ministry record. I have letters from Gringotts about the legal situation and a spare wand." He paused. "Do you think you can walk?" Sirius made a sound that started as something fragile and ended as something that was recognizably, under everything, a laugh. "Can I?" He put a hand against the wall and pushed himself upright. His legs shook slightly. He straightened. He was still tall. "Yeah," he said. "I can walk." "Good," Harry said. He held up his hand and Fawkes came to his wrist and Harry extended his other hand to Sirius. Hold on. Sirius looked at the hand. Then at the bird. Then at the 8-year-old boy who had walked into Azkaban, bypassed its dementors, broken open his cell, fed him bread and cheese, and was now offering him a way out with the calm manner of someone running an errand. James would have lost his mind completely at this, Sirius said, and took Harry's hand. The Phoenix Fire took them. The Highland property was called Cairn Ignis. Harry had discovered this from the bloodline documents and had found the name apt enough to feel intentional. It was a stone house on a hillside overlooking a loch, surrounded by old trees that had been growing there since the estate was established in the 18th century. The wards that Harry had refreshed in July hummed steadily around it, calm and solid and entirely their own. They arrived in the main room, which smelled of wood and old stone and the specific clean smell of a house that had been maintained but not inhabited. Harry lit the fireplace by means of touching his palm to the hearth, which was faster than looking for matches. Sirius sat down in the nearest chair. He sat there for a long moment, looking at the fire, breathing the air. Harry could see him making the adjustment, the physical recalibration of a person who had not been warm in 7 years. Harry made tea. He found everything in the kitchen with minimal searching, having had Gringotts stock the house specifically for this, and made proper tea and brought 2 cups and sat across from Sirius and waited. "You're 8, Sirius said eventually. "Yes. You broke into Azkaban." "I didn't break in exactly. I unpicked the ward structure on the gate and the Dementors stood aside." Harry considered this. It was more of an administrative entry. Sirius stared at him for a moment, and then the laugh came properly this time, not what the laugh had been in the street outside a burning house, that terrible inverted grief, but the real version, rough and surprised and warm. "Administrative entry," he repeated. "Right. Yeah." Harry let him laugh. It seemed like something that was needed. When it settled, Sirius wrapped both hands around his mug and looked at Harry with the steady attention of a man who is coming back to himself slowly and is paying close attention to what he's coming back to. "Your letters, Sharpfang told me you'd been in contact, in messages from him, said you know about everything." "I know about Pettigrew," Harry said. "I know he was the secret keeper, not you. I know you went after him and he faked his death and framed you. I know there was no trial." He paused. "I know about my father's custody designation." Sirius was quiet for a moment. "You know Dumbledore pushed for the imprisonment." "I know." "He didn't believe me," Sirius said, and the way he said it was not with anger, exactly, but with the specific weight of a hurt that has been examined from every angle for 7 years. "I don't know if he didn't believe me or if he decided it was more convenient for me to be out of the way. I've had a lot of time to think about which one was worse." Harry looked at him steadily. He thought about the personal ward on the cell door. He decided not to tell Sirius about that yet. Sirius needed to stabilize before Harry handed him a new weight to carry. "Both," Harry said simply. "I think it was both, and I think he found a way to convince himself that being convenient and being right were the same thing. He stopped, looking for the word. "That's how he works." Sirius looked at his godson with an expression Harry couldn't fully read, something between grief and wonder. "You sound like you're 40. "I've had a particular education," Harry said. "Yeah, I'll say." Sirius leaned forward. "What's the plan?" "The full plan. Sharpfang gave me outlines but he said you'd want to brief me directly." Harry appreciated this about Sharpfang. The goblin had a talent for creating space for the relevant parties to speak to each other directly rather than routing everything through intermediary. Harry pulled out the document case and laid its contents on the low table between them, the legal correspondence, the petition status, the Wisingamot documentation, the notes on the ministry's current position. He went through it systematically. Sirius listened with the focused attention of someone who had spent 7 years with nothing to do but think and was now receiving information the way a dry ground receives rain. He asked sharp, specific questions. He caught implications that Harry had noted and implications Harry had missed, and Harry noted these with genuine interest because Sirius, underneath the damage, was clearly quick. James Potter had not picked a stupid man for a best friend or a godfather. "The Pettigrew problem," Sirius said, when they'd finished the legal review. "He's alive. Probably in hiding. You're not going to be able to fully clear my name without him or without the forensic evidence that the bodies at the scene weren't consistent with my casting." "I know," Harry said. "Bones is working on the forensic analysis. The original aura reports are still in the DMLE files and apparently the physical evidence never supported the conviction. Nobody looked properly." He paused. "As for Pettigrew, do you know where he'd go? If he was hiding, staying hidden, for years?" Sirius thought about this. He was always a coward first. He'd go somewhere safe, somewhere he was protected by something bigger than himself. He stopped. He'd attach himself to someone. His expression went dark. Voldemort. Or the nearest proxy to Voldemort he could find. "There are families in Britain who sheltered known Death Eaters and were never prosecuted," Harry said. "The Malfoys," Sirius said immediately. "Or, wait. No, Lucius is too high profile. Pettigrew would want to be invisible." He thought. "Somewhere with access to the magical world but not too visible. He could transform, he's an animagus, a rat, unregistered. If he was staying transformed, staying hidden, he could be anywhere," Harry said. "Including somewhere very ordinary." "Including a magical family where a rat wouldn't be questioned," Sirius said, and his eyes sharpened. He liked families with children. He always thought it made things safer. People don't look for threats in domestic settings. Harry filed this carefully. "We'll find him eventually. The legal case can proceed far enough without him that by the time we need the confirmation, we'll have enough of the other pieces in place." Sirius looked at him. "You're really 8. "Nearly 9, Harry said, with the same mild correction he'd been making for years, and Sirius laughed again, and this time it was completely genuine and it filled the stone room with something that had been absent from it for a very long time. Over the next 2 weeks, Sirius recovered with the speed of someone whose body remembered what it was supposed to be doing and was angry about the interruption. He ate everything Harry arranged to have delivered through a Gringotts supply chain that left no ministry records. He slept for 12 to 14 hours the first few days and then gradually less as his body recalibrated. He walked around the lock every morning in the early light, starting with the shaky gait of a man relearning distance and improving daily. On the 4th day, he found Harry in the main room in the early evening sitting with his hands palm up in his lap, the phoenix warmth visibly steady in both palms, and sat down across from him without interrupting what was obviously a practice session. When Harry brought his hands down and looked up, Sirius was watching him with an expression that was both thoughtful and carefully controlled. "The Hogwarts letter," Sirius said. "You'll have gotten one." "Yes. 3 years ago, actually, which is," Harry paused. "The letters are generated by the quill of acceptance, which is keyed to magical awakening. Mine apparently caused enough of a stir that I got an early notification. He'd gotten that from Ollivander, who had found this deeply interesting. I start this September. So do I need to worry about you for the next 3 years, Sirius said, or just from September onward?" "September onward," Harry said. "Though worry is probably the wrong framing. You're walking into a school that Dumbledore runs." "Yes. With a plan. Always." Sirius rubbed his face. He was looking considerably more like the photographs now, the bones of him reasserting themselves as his body recovered, the dark eyes clearer. "I need to ask you something and I need you to answer it honestly." He met Harry's eyes. "What is it you actually want? Not the strategy. Not the legal pieces. What do you want out of all of this?" Harry sat with this for a moment. It was a good question. It was the question that nobody else had thought to ask him. "I want Sirius Black free and cleared," Harry said. "I want the truth about Peter Pettigrew public. I want Dumbledore's plan dismantled before I have to live inside it. I want the wizarding world to have an accurate account of its own history. He paused. I want to go to school and learn things and meet people who are worth knowing. Another pause. I want to figure out how to deal with Voldemort in a way that doesn't involve me dying, because apparently I can actually do that, and it seems worth exploring. Sirius was quiet for a moment. And, Harry said, slightly less evenly, I would like to have at least one person in my life who knew my parents and can tell me about them. Not the legend. Them. The silence after this was a different quality from the silences before. Sirius sat forward and put his elbows on his knees and looked at the fire. Your father, he said, once enchanted all the mirrors in the Hogwarts boys' dormitory to only reflect Quidditch statistics for a week because he lost a bet and couldn't admit it. Your mother found out within 2 days and made him fix it, but she was laughing the whole time. He paused. Lily could do with fire what you're doing with fire. I never knew why. I understand now. Another pause. She would have, he stopped. Started again. She was the kind of person who, if she'd known what Dumbledore had planned, would have burned his entire office down and been entirely right to do it. Harry thought about Helena Ignis, who had burned a house down and built something better. Yes, he said. I think so too. Fawkes appeared on the window ledge above them, silent and warm and entirely present, and sang one phrase that sat in the firelit room like something that had been waiting to be said for 8 years. Neither of them needed to translate it. It was 3 days after this that Dumbledore came. Harry felt the approach before he heard anything, a shift in the ward perimeter, a magical pressure that was distinctive and familiar, moving toward the property with the careful confidence of someone who had located the place through means he wasn't interested in sharing. Harry had known this moment was coming. He'd thought it would take longer. He'd underestimated the monitoring network. He went downstairs to find Sirius already at the window, watching the tree line with the alert stillness of a man whose threat assessment had been sharpened to a fine point by 7 years in a cell. Someone's coming, Sirius said. Dumbledore, Harry said. Sirius's jaw tightened. Do you want me? Stay here, Harry said. Let me handle the first part. He went outside. He stood in front of Cairn Ignis in the late afternoon light and waited, hands in his pockets, the ember warm and steady in his chest, and watched Albus Dumbledore come out of the trees. In person, the old man was more compelling than the vision had prepared him for. He was very tall, with the particular presence of someone accustomed to being the most significant person in any room, a gravity that came from decades of competence and authority and the specific confidence of someone who had never seriously considered being wrong. His half-moon spectacles caught the light. His robes were deep blue today, moving slightly in the Highland wind. He looked at Harry, and Harry looked back. The old man's expression went through several things very quickly. Something that might have been surprise, suppressed almost instantly. Something that was undeniably relief. Harry noted this with interest, because it was genuine, which meant the concern was real, which didn't simplify things. And then something that settled into the careful warmth of a man who has rehearsed this conversation. Harry, Dumbledore said. His voice was exactly as Harry had expected from the visions, warm, measured, with a depth that came from genuinely understanding people. I have been looking for you. I know, Harry said. I've been busy. Indeed. The blue eyes behind the spectacles were doing the thing Harry had expected, moving over him with the assessment of a man recalibrating his model. You appear well. I am well. Harry tilted his head. What did you want to say to me? Dumbledore paused. Harry could see him adjusting his approach in real time. The prepared conversation had assumed a child, and the child standing in front of him was not what had been prepared for. I wanted to ensure you were safe. You disappeared from Privet Drive without telling you, Harry said. Yes. That was intentional. A beat. I see. Dumbledore moved forward slightly. Harry didn't move. Harry, I think we should speak honestly with each other. I'd like that very much, Harry said pleasantly. I've been looking forward to it. The old man's eyes moved. Not nervous, he was too experienced for nervous, but recalibrating again, finding the new coordinates of this conversation. You know about the custodianship. And its revocation, yes. Also the guardianship designation my father made. Harry looked at him steadily. Also the irregularities in the imprisonment of Sirius Black. Also the prophecy and who reported it to Voldemort and why you sealed the testimony. Also the wards on Sirius's cell, specifically. He paused. Also the general architecture of what you intended for me. The silence was complete and heavy and the Highland wind moved through it without disturbing it. Dumbledore looked at Harry for a long moment. Then he did something Harry had not expected, because Harry had been preparing for denial or redirection or the specific warmth that functioned as management. He did none of these things. He sat down on the stone wall of the garden. And he looked tired. It was genuine tiredness. Harry could see that. The kind that comes not from exertion but from carrying something very heavy for a very long time and being, in this moment, too old to pretend the weight isn't there. You know what the prophecy says, Dumbledore said. I know what it says. I know what you chose it to mean. Harry sat down on the wall on the other side of the gate, facing him. A power the Dark Lord knows not. That phrase has interested me considerably. Dumbledore looked at him. And what do you believe it means? I believe it means I don't have to die, Harry said simply. I believe you interpreted it as a sacrificial requirement because a sacrifice was the mechanism you were most comfortable with, and because it absolved you of the responsibility of finding another way. He kept his voice even. I don't think you're a bad man. I think you're a man who decided the cost was acceptable and then spent 15 years making sure the person paying it had no choice in the matter. Dumbledore was quiet for a long moment. The light was going golden in the late afternoon and the lock below them caught it and turned it back. You are, he said finally, quietly, not what I planned for. No, Harry said. I'm what I planned for. There's a difference. Harry. The old man looked at him, and what was in his eyes now was complicated and real and not entirely unlike grief. Voldemort is not finished. Whatever you believe about the prophecy, whatever I have done wrong, and I will not insult you by denying that I have done wrong, the threat is real. The danger is real. I know that, Harry said. I've always known that. I've been preparing for it since I was 6. He met the blue eyes steadily. What I object to is not being told. What I object to is being arranged. What I object to is the assumption that the solution required my death rather than my choice. He paused. You could have told me. You could have told my parents, before they died, that their son might need to face this. You might have gotten a different prophecy. Or you might have found another way. We'll never know, because you decided the architecture before anyone else had the chance. Dumbledore said nothing. Harry thought this was, in its own way, more significant than any response would have been. I'm going to Hogwarts, Harry said. I'm going to learn what I need to learn. I'm going to deal with Voldemort, and I'm going to do it without dying, and you're going to have to trust that I can manage that without your specific management. He stood. Sirius Black is here. He is under the protection of Gringotts and Cairngorms wards and me, and he will remain here until the Wizengamot formally clears him, which will happen within the year. You're going to let that process run without interference. Dumbledore stood slowly. He looked at Harry with the expression of a man reassessing the board. And if I don't? He asked, and there was no threat in it. It was a genuine question. Harry looked at him with green eyes that held no fear and no performance of fearlessness but just the ordinary certainty of someone who knows exactly where they stand. Then I send the letter I've had drafted for 14 months to the Daily Prophet, which details every procedural irregularity in the Black imprisonment with full statutory citation and a witness list that includes Amelia Bones and a representative from Gringotts. He paused. And I include the section about the sealed testimony in the prophecy record. And I include the personal ward on the cell door. Dumbledore looked at him for a very long moment. Then, and this was the most surprising thing he had done yet, he nodded. Once, slow, the nod of a man accepting a new reality. You will need allies at Hogwarts, he said. People you can trust. I know, Harry said. I've already started identifying them. The old man looked at him a moment longer. Then he said, very quietly, you are very like your mother. And before Harry could respond to this, before he could decide what to do with the genuine sadness in it, Dumbledore turned and walked back into the trees. Harry stood at the gate of Cairn Ignis and watched him go. Sirius appeared at his shoulder. That went better than it could have, he said. It went the way it needed to, Harry said. He'll recalibrate. Make new plans. Yes. Harry looked at the empty tree line. So will I. Above them, Fawkes called once from the rooftop, a single clear note that the Highland air carried out over the loch until it was indistinguishable from the wind. Harry turned and went back inside to make dinner, because it was late and they were both hungry, and some things needed to continue being ordinary even when everything else was not. Chapter 4, The Board Moves. The Wizengamot formal hearing for Sirius Orion Black was held on the 3rd of February, 9 months after Harry had first filed the petition, in the full circular chamber beneath the Ministry of Magic with 52 members present and the public gallery at capacity because someone, Harry strongly suspected the journalist Amelia Bones had quietly briefed, had written a careful, factual piece in the Daily Prophet about procedural irregularities in a 7-year-old imprisonment case without naming names, which was precisely the kind of article that made people very curious about names. Harry was not in the public gallery. He was in a small antechamber off the main corridor with Sharpfang, who was reviewing his notes, and Sirius, who was wearing robes that Gringotts had arranged and was managing his composure with visible effort. The robes fit properly. This seemed to matter to Sirius in a way Harry understood without needing it explained. There was something about fitting correctly in the physical world after 7 years of a cell that carried a specific weight. You don't need to testify, Harry said, for the second time that morning. I know, Sirius said, for the second time that morning. The documentation is sufficient. Bones has the forensic reanalysis. Sharpfang has the procedural record. The case stands on its own. I know, Sirius said again, and the quality of it was different this second time, not deflection but decision. I need to be in that room, Harry. I've been in a cell for 7 years because no one listened to me. I need to stand in front of them and say it. Harry looked at him for a moment. Then he nodded once, which was all the argument he was going to make. Sharpfang folded his notes. The panel is constituted, he said. Madame Bones chairs. Of the 52 members, 31 have reviewed the preliminary documentation. Of those 31, preliminary indications suggest 24 lean toward the procedural invalidation. The remaining votes are soft. He paused. There will be opposition. Specifically, 3 members of the Wizengamot who were involved in the original decision are present today. Who pushed hardest for the original imprisonment? Harry asked. Bartemius Crouch Sr., Sharpfang said. Who is in the gallery? He will not be voting, he recused himself, which was the legally correct and personally strategic move. But his presence will influence others. Harry thought about Crouch. He'd read the file, a man who had used wartime authority like a precision instrument, who had authorized actions during the war that sat in a moral grey zone the size of Scotland, who had a son currently in Azkaban for a different crime entirely. A man whose entire identity was built on the idea that his decisions had been right and necessary. Crouch's presence in that gallery was a statement. I don't regret it. Let him be there, Harry said. It doesn't change the evidence. Sharpfang made a sound of agreement. The door to the chamber opened and a ministry official with harried eyes and a clipboard appeared. They're ready, he said. Harry watched through a narrow window in the antechamber as the hearing unfolded. He could see the chamber in partial view, the tiered circular seating, the panel at the top, Bones at its center with her monocle and her comprehensive command of the room. Sirius was escorted in by two Aurors, which Harry had objected to on principle but accepted on practicality, and stood in the center chair with the bearing of a man who had decided to be present for this completely. The procedural case took 40 minutes. Sharpfong presented it with the compressed efficiency of a creature for whom time was genuinely money, and the 15 irregularities unfurled one by one into the chamber's record with the cumulative effect of a building losing its load-bearing walls. Bones asked precise questions. The three Wisengamot members who'd been present at the original decision sat very still. Then Sirius spoke. Harry couldn't hear every word through the glass, but he could see. He could see the chamber's attention shift when Sirius stood, that particular change in the air that happens when a room realizes it is being addressed by someone with something real to say. Sirius spoke for 12 minutes. He wasn't loud. He wasn't performing. He stood in the center of the chamber where he had never stood for his original trial and said what had happened in simple, specific terms, the name of the real secret keeper, the events of the night in question, what he had seen, what had actually happened to those muggles and by whose wand. He said it clearly and he looked at the panel while he said it and he didn't look anywhere near Bartemius Crouch in the gallery. The vote was 41-11. Harry heard the announcement through the door and sat back against the antechamber wall and felt the ember in his chest do something that wasn't quite warmth and wasn't quite relief but was the specific deep satisfaction of a mechanism completing its purpose. The door opened and Sirius came through and his eyes were doing the thing Harry gave him privacy for, and Harry stood up and Sirius grabbed the back of his head with one large hand and pressed his forehead to the top of Harry's hair for about 4 seconds and Harry let this happen without comment, which felt like the right response. Right, Sirius said, voice slightly rough. Right. What's next? Lunch, Harry said. Then we come back and file for the formal restoration of the Black Estate holdings. Sharpfong has the papers. Sirius pulled back and looked at him with the expression Harry had catalogued as he's 8 and I keep forgetting. Obviously. Also, Harry said, picking up the document case, there's a matter of Peter Pettigrew's whereabouts that I'd like to discuss over food. Sharpfong, packing his own considerably larger document case, made a sound of quiet satisfaction. It was the closest thing to enthusiasm Harry had ever heard from him. The Daily Prophet ran the story the next morning. Harry had expected this. He had not expected the scale of it. The front page, full column, with a photograph of Sirius leaving the ministry in proper robes with his cleared status confirmed. The headline was restrained, wrongful imprisonment, Wisengamot clears Sirius Black after 7 years, but the article below it was not restrained at all, because the journalist Bones had briefed had done her job properly and the story she had to tell was the kind that didn't require embellishment. The procedural failures were detailed. The evidence that had never been properly examined was detailed. The name of Bartemius Crouch Sr. appeared 4 times, always in the context of decisions made and not revisited. The name Albus Dumbledore appeared twice, in connection with the irregular custodianship of Harry Potter's accounts and the sealed testimony in the prophecy record, both described as matters currently under DMLE review. Harry read the article at the kitchen table in Cairnagnes while Sirius read it over his shoulder and made occasional sounds that were somewhere between satisfaction and vindication. The prophecy record mention, Sirius said. That's going to move things. Yes, Harry said. It's supposed to. Sirius straightened. You planned that. I planned that Bones would choose what to release, because she'd choose correctly. I didn't write it for her. Harry turned the page. Page 6. Sirius turned to page 6. A smaller article, bottom corner, easy to miss, Ministry confirms investigation into Gringotts custodianship irregularities, Potter estate accounts under review. The custodianship revocation, Sirius said. Dumbledore had been drawing management fees from the Potter estate, Harry said evenly. Sharpfong found it in the 3rd audit. Small amounts, consistently, clearly not theft in the technical legal sense because the custodianship technically permitted it. But in the current climate, he gestured at page 1. Sirius sat down. His expression was doing several things. Harry. The management fees aren't the important part of what he did. No, Harry agreed. But they're the part that the Wisengamot can vote on in a public session without getting into prophecies and sacrifices and 15-year plans, which are harder to legislate. He met Sirius's eyes. You dismantle a complicated structure by removing the accessible pieces first. The architecture collapses on its own after that. Sirius stared at him. You know what you sound like. I know, Harry said. It bothers me sometimes too. I was going to say you sound like your mother arguing legal theory, Sirius said. Which is the most terrifying thing I have ever seen, and I was a student when the Marauders were at their peak. Harry folded the newspaper. We need to deal with the Pettigrew question before September, he said. I need to know where he is before I walk into Hogwarts, because if he's somewhere inside that building I want to know it in advance. Sirius had been thinking about this since their conversation at Cairngorm. He'd spent the week since his release talking to people, carefully, quietly, through channels Sharpfong facilitated, building back the picture of the wizarding world as it currently stood. He put his mug down and his eyes went sharp. Tell me what you know about the Weasley family. Harry considered. Old wizarding family. 7 children, modest means. Father works in the Ministry Misuse of Muggle Artifacts office. Mother is formidable. 2 eldest sons finished Hogwarts, 3 currently enrolled, 2 not yet of age. He paused. They had a financial gift arriving anonymously starting November 1981. I told you about that. Dumbledore's network, Sirius said. He kept tabs on all the families close to Lily and James. The Weasleys were, Arthur Weasley knew James. Not close friends, but they respected each other. He frowned. The youngest children. How old? Harry thought. The girl would be about my age. The youngest boy a year older. Do they have a pet rat? Harry stilled. He turned this over very carefully. I don't know. Because Pettigrew is an unregistered animagus. A rat. And if he wanted somewhere safe, somewhere domestic, somewhere a rat would be completely invisible and unquestioned, Sirius stopped. His jaw was tight. A family with children who'd have a pet rat, Harry said slowly. Who's had this particular rat for how long? I don't know. I don't know if I'm right. It's a thought. Sirius rubbed his forehead. I don't want to, the Weasleys are good people. They don't know. If Pettigrew is there, they have no idea what they're sheltering. No, Harry agreed. But we need to know. Can you, through your contacts, quietly, find out whether the Weasley family has had a pet rat for an unusually long time? Sirius nodded once, the nod of a man who has been given a specific task and intends to complete it. Harry recognized this as the real Sirius emerging more fully each day, not the broken man from the cell but the person who had been an Auror candidate before the war, sharp and capable and now with something to aim at. 2 days later, Sirius came back from a meeting with a witch named Dorcas who had maintained contact with Arthur Weasley over the years, and he sat down across from Harry with an expression that confirmed it before he spoke. Scabbers, he said. The rat. They've had him for 12 years. Percy Weasley got him from an uncle and passed him to Ron, the youngest boy. He's missing a toe on his front paw. His voice was completely level in the way that required active effort. Peter Pettigrew was missing a finger. The kitchen was very quiet. Right, Harry said. He stood up and went to the window and looked out at the loch for a moment, thinking. He's a pet in a child's house. If we go for him directly, if there's any confrontation involving the Weasley children, I know, Sirius said. I know. We need to get him out from under the children without frightening anyone. Harry thought about this. Amelia Bones. If she can conduct a targeted search, quiet, presented as a follow-up to the cleared case, she'd need reasonable cause for a specific address. She'll have it. Harry turned back from the window. I'll write to her today. We don't need to tell her everything, we just need to give her enough to look at the Weasley family's registered magical pets and find an unregistered animagus." Sirius looked at him. "You're worried about something else." Harry was quiet for a moment. This was the thing he'd been thinking around for several weeks, the shape at the edge of the situation that he hadn't looked at directly yet. "If Pettigrew is alive," he said carefully, "then Voldemort has a route back. A servant who escaped, who knows the details of everything that happened the night my parents died, who is useful precisely because the wizarding world thinks he's dead. You think Voldemort will come back regardless? I think he's not finished. The way you're not finished just because you lose a body." Harry met Sirius's eyes. "I've been preparing for it. But the timeline matters. And Pettigrew being found and questioned under Veritaserum, his testimony about what actually happened that night, about who Voldemort's supporters were, about what was planned, that changes the landscape considerably. It also paints a target," Sirius said quietly. "Yes," Harry said. "But the target has been painted since I was 15 months old. I'd rather be moving when it comes than standing still." Sirius looked at him for a long moment. He'd stopped doing the "he's 8" look. He'd replaced it with something that was harder to name, something that was part uncle and part ally and part the specific grief of a man who had known Lily Evans and was watching her come back in a form neither of them had anticipated. "Your parents would be," Sirius said, and stopped. Started again. James would have been completely impossible about all of this. He would have been so proud he wouldn't have known what to do with it. Harry looked back at him steadily. "What would my mother have thought?" Sirius smiled, and it was the full smile now, the real one, the one that had been buried under 7 years and was still alive. "She'd have thought you were cutting corners somewhere and she'd have found the corner and she'd have made more actions right the next chapter now." Chapter 5, Hogwarts burning. The Hogwarts Express left King's Cross at 11 o'clock on the 1st of September, and Harry was on it 12 minutes early. He'd chosen his compartment deliberately, third from the engine, left side, facing forward, because Fawkes had shown him enough of the train's layout in passing visions that he knew which compartments got the most foot traffic and which sat quiet. He wanted quiet for the first hour. He had things to think through and the thinking required space. Sirius had seen him off at the barrier. Not through it, Sirius was maintaining a careful public profile until the formal estate restoration completed, staying visible in the right places and absent from the wrong ones, but at the barrier itself, one hand briefly on Harry's shoulder, the specific grip of someone who has recently learned to hold things without holding too tight. "Right," Sirius had said. Weakly, Harry had confirmed. "Don't blow anything up." "I'll try." "Harry." Harry had looked up. "You know it won't be simple, in there." Sirius had meant more than the building. "Even with everything you've prepared. There'll be things you didn't plan for. People." A pause. "Let some of them surprise you." Harry had thought about this on the platform, and on the walk to the compartment, and he was still thinking about it when the train began to move and London started falling away outside the window. Let some of them surprise you. He was aware that he'd spent 3 years building walls that looked like strategy. That there was a difference between being prepared and being armored. He'd spent enough time reading people, Bones, Sharp Fong, Fig, even Dumbledore, to know the difference between useful caution and the kind of closed-off wariness that turned into its own kind of prison. He put the thought away for now. The train had reached the outer edges of the city and the light was changing, the cramped brick and glass giving way to green, and Harry watched it and felt the ember in his chest settle to its traveling warmth. The compartment door opened. A boy stood in it, round-faced and slightly anxious, with the look of someone who had been walking the train for some time and had not found what he was looking for. He spotted Harry and his expression cycled through the standard sequence, recognition of the scar, recalibration, attempt to look normal. "Sorry," the boy said. "I'm looking for a toad." "You haven't seen one?" "No," Harry said. "Sit down if you want." The boy blinked at the directness of this and then, apparently deciding it was better than more toad searching, sat. He had a round, honest face and hands that were currently worrying at the strap of his bag, and he had, Harry checked, because he always checked now, the faint green-silver shimmer in his hands that Fawkes had shown him 2 years ago. Neville Longbottom, the boy said. Harry Potter, Harry said, and watched Neville's face very carefully, because how people responded to his name in the first 3 seconds told him more than most things. Neville's face did, recognition, nervousness, and then, quickly overlaid, but there, something that was its own kind of resignation. The look of a boy who knows he's supposed to have been the other candidate. Who has grown up knowing that the prophecy had pointed at 2 children and the world had chosen one and left the other in a specific kind of shadow. Harry had been thinking about what to say to Neville Longbottom for 2 years. Your parents, Harry said. Frank and Alice. Horrors. Neville went still. They fought against Voldemort. Multiple times. They were tortured into incapacity by Death Eaters after the war ended. Harry said it plainly, no cushioning, because Neville had been fed softened versions of this story his whole life, and soft stories about hard things did not help anyone. They're still alive. You visit them at St. Mungo's. How do you? Neville started. I've done a lot of reading, Harry said. Your grandmother raised you. Yes. Neville's hands had stopped moving on the strap. She thinks you're not very magical. Neville's jaw tightened. She doesn't say it like that, Harry said. But she's been worried since you were small. There's a family story about you not showing magic until you were nearly 8, and someone dropped you out of a window to try to frighten it out of you. He watched Neville's face. Your magic is fine, Neville. It's not the problem. Neville stared at him. You've just met me. I know. Harry held up his right hand, palm up. The phoenix warmth sat in it, steady and visible. I have a hereditary magical inheritance that manifested when I was 6. Part of what it does is let me perceive magical signatures. He lowered his hand. You have a signature I recognized from a description. It's not phoenix. It's something older. Earth-based, I think, green magic, growth, the kind associated with the oldest wizarding bloodlines. I'm not, Neville stopped. He was looking at Harry with the specific expression of someone who has been told something they desperately want to be true and is afraid to believe it. My gran says I'm barely a squib. Your gran, Harry said, is wrong. Not maliciously. But wrong. He paused. The thing about earth magic is that it doesn't respond to wand technique the way standard magic does. It responds to intent and connection. Which means every time you've tried to perform by-the-book spells under pressure from someone who thinks you're failing, you've been using the wrong method for what you actually are. Neville was very quiet. You'll need to find out more about it yourself, Harry said. I'm not an expert on your specific inheritance, just on what it looks like from the outside. But I think when you find the right approach, he stopped. I think you're going to surprise some people considerably. The compartment door opened again. A girl came in at considerable velocity, with a cloud of brown hair and a self-possessed expression and a book under one arm that she was clearly annoyed to have had to stop reading. Have you seen a toad? She asked. There's a boy, Neville, Harry said. She's looking for yours. Oh. Neville scrambled up. The girl gave a rapid survey of the compartment with the eyes of someone cataloging everything in her immediate environment, paused slightly on Harry's scar, and then extended her hand with the directness of someone for whom social protocol was a system to be followed efficiently. Hermione Granger. Harry Potter. He shook her hand. I know who you are, she said, with a tone that suggested this was simply a data point rather than an occasion for reverence. I've read quite a lot about you. About your history, that is. The books are interesting, but I suspect they're considerably incomplete. They are, Harry said. Hermione looked at him with the sharp focus of someone recalibrating rapidly. She'd arrived expecting the legend and found someone who confirmed the incompleteness of his own mythology with the ease of a person who has never needed the mythology. The toad is in compartment 7, she said to Neville, and then to Harry, do you mind if I sit here? The rest of the train is rather loud. Sit down, Harry said. She sat, opened her book, and said without looking up, the article about the Sirius Black case was interesting. The procedural analysis was quite detailed. I've been reading about wizarding law since July. Since July, Harry said. I wanted to be prepared. She turned a page. The Wisengamot voting structure is inefficient. 52 members for routine legal decisions creates too many opportunities for bloc politics to override individual judgment. Yes, Harry said. It does. She looked up. You know that already. I've had some experience with it recently. There was a pause. Hermione looked at him with the expression of someone deciding how direct to be and then deciding, correctly, that directness was the most efficient approach. Are you actually 11? She asked. Actually 11, Harry confirmed. It's been a busy few years. Neville came back with the toad, which he settled in its box with relieved competence. He looked between Harry and Hermione and seemed to decide that sitting back down was the right move. The three of them occupied the compartment for the next several hours with the specific comfortable quality of people who are reading or thinking and don't need to fill silence to be at ease. Around Norwich, the compartment door opened a third time. Two boys, both blonde, one broader and one slight, with the air of people accustomed to their arrival being noticed. The broader one, Harry recognized the name from files before the boy said it, was Draco Malfoy, and he was looking around the compartment with the surveying expression of a person conducting an assessment. Harry Potter, Malfoy said, and extended his hand. I'm Draco Malfoy. Harry looked at the hand. Then at Malfoy. Then he shook it, because refusing was dramatic and unnecessary, and because he was genuinely interested in what Draco Malfoy was going to do with actual engagement rather than the legend. I know, Harry said. Sit down if you want. Malfoy blinked. This was clearly not the expected response. He sat, with the slight uncertainty of someone who has prepared for a scene and found the other party unwilling to perform their role. His companions, Crabbe and Goyle, who had the look of furniture that had recently learned to walk, remained by the door. I heard you were cleared of something, Malfoy said, with studied casualness. You and someone named Black. The case was resolved, Harry said pleasantly. My father was involved, tangentially, in the original situation, Malfoy said, and Harry heard the layers in this, the careful distance, the awareness of what involved tangentially actually meant, the specific discomfort of a boy whose family history was a series of elegant landmines. I know what your father's involvement was, Harry said, in the same pleasant tone. I'm not interested in holding the sins of parents against their children. Malfoy stared at him. Whatever he'd expected from the boy who lived, it clearly wasn't this. Harry watched him recalibrate and found it interesting. Malfoy was quicker than the file on his family suggested he'd be. The Malfoy tendency toward performance was there, but underneath it was an actual person doing actual thinking. The sorting, Malfoy said, finding his footing in a topic he could manage. You'd be Gryffindor, I suppose. Family history. Probably, Harry said. Where do you think you'll go? Slytherin. No hesitation. Family tradition. Harry nodded. Does that bother you? A beat. A fast, well-controlled flicker behind the grey eyes. Why would it bother me? It wouldn't, Harry said. If you wanted it. I'm asking if you want it. The compartment was quiet. Neville was watching with the alert attention of someone witnessing something he hadn't expected. Hermione had closed her book. Malfoy's chin lifted. I'll be in Slytherin, he said, with the specific certainty of someone closing a door they've decided not to look behind. He stood, straightened his robes with precision, and looked at Harry with an expression that was composed and genuine and slightly wrong at the edges. I expect we'll see each other in classes. We will, Harry said. Malfoy, the Slytherin thing. The tradition. He met the gray eyes directly. Make sure it's a choice. That's all. Malfoy held his gaze for a moment. Then he left, Crabbe and Goyle falling in behind him, and the door slid closed. Neville let out a breath. He's not a bad person, Harry said. He's a person in a bad situation who hasn't decided yet what to do about it. He picked up his book. He will, eventually. Hermione was looking at him. How do you do that? She asked. Just, talk to people like that. Like what? Like you already know them. But not in a rude way. Like you've already done the assessment and decided their worth. She stopped, looking for the word. I read a lot, Harry said. About families, histories. The wizarding world is smaller than it thinks. Most of the significant people are connected by about 4 degrees. That's not what I mean, Hermione said. I mean the way you look at people like you see the part they're not showing. Harry looked at her for a moment. Hermione Granger, he thought, was going to be one of the most interesting people at Hogwarts. Not because she was clever, she was clearly the cleverest person he'd met who was roughly his own age, but because she cared about being right more than she cared about being impressive, and in his experience those were almost mutually exclusive qualities, and people who had the former were the ones actually worth talking to. I see what's there, Harry said. People show more than they think they do. Hermione looked at him for another second, then opened her book again. But she was smiling slightly at the page. Outside, Scotland was assembling itself from the darkening sky. Hogwarts hit him like a chord. Not the boats, though the boats across the Black Lake were genuinely impressive. Not the first glimpse of the castle against the sky. It was the wards. The moment Harry stepped out of the boats onto the bank, he felt the full weight of Hogwarts' magical structure pressing against his awareness, 1,000-year-old enchantments layered over each other with the dense complexity of a living thing, more intricate than anything he'd touched before, more alive than the simple protective barriers at Privet Drive or even the refreshed wards at Cairn Ignis. He stood still for a moment and just felt it. The ember in his chest responded, not with alarm but with something closer to recognition, old magic recognizing older magic. Neville appeared at his elbow, looking up at the castle with the expression of someone who has been told a story their whole life and is now standing inside it. It's bigger than I expected, he said. It's bigger than it looks, Harry said. The interior doesn't follow the exterior geometry. There are spatial enchantments throughout. He started walking. Also there's a section on the 7th floor that I think contains something significant, but I haven't worked out the exact mechanism yet. Neville gave him a look. You've researched the specific enchantments of the castle. Some of them. There are limits, most of the architectural spellwork predates the documentation era. He paused. There's also a vault. Below ground, behind at least 6 concealment spells. I could feel it from the lake. Neville blinked. A vault. Containing something that someone very powerful placed there in the last 12 months and would very much like people not to find. Harry looked thoughtful. Which is either a very effective deterrent for thieves or an extremely obvious invitation for anyone with a specific interest in the object. What object? I'll tell you when I'm sure. He wasn't entirely sure yet. He had strong suspicions. He needed confirmation. McGonagall met them in the entrance hall, tall and precise and crackling with the specific energy of a woman managing 40 new children and finding most of them inadequate. She gave her speech about the 4 houses with the practiced economy of someone who has given it hundreds of times and still means it, and Harry listened and thought about houses. He knew where he was going. He'd known for years. The Sorting Hat made decisions based on dominant qualities, not simple binary sorting, and Harry's dominant qualities were complicated. The Hat would find courage and cunning and a kind of patience that sat closer to wisdom than to ambivalence. But the family history would speak loudest, and Harry was not unaware that placing himself outside the expected narrative would create complications he didn't need. Gryffindor suited him. He was brave. He was stubborn. He genuinely didn't understand why you'd walk away from a thing that needed doing just because it was frightening. This was not performance, it was just who he was. The great hall was vast and candlelit and full of several hundred children who made a collective sound when Harry came in that he ignored with practiced ease. The ceiling was the night sky, charmed to reflect the actual weather outside, which was cloud-heavy and deep blue, and Harry looked at it for a moment because it was genuinely beautiful and there was nothing wrong with acknowledging beauty. The sorting hat went on its stool. It sang. Harry barely listened to the song, which covered the four houses' qualities in the manner of a slightly exhausted ballad. He was watching the faces of the staff table. Dumbledore, at the center, looking at the new students with an expression of benign welcome that Harry had learned to translate correctly, underneath the welcome, an assessment, a specific seeking. Looking for Harry. He found him, and their eyes met across the great hall, and Dumbledore's expression did one small complicated thing before settling back into the benign welcome. Harry looked away first, not from deference but from having seen everything he needed to see. Quirrell was at the end of the staff table. Defense against the dark arts, per the seating. He had a nervous manner and a turban that smelled, from 20 feet away, of garlic and something underneath the garlic that was older and stranger, something Harry had felt once in the vision of the night his parents died. He filed this very carefully. He'd expected it but confirmed was different from expected. The sorting proceeded. Hermione went to Gryffindor with the expression of someone entirely satisfied with their result. Malfoy went to Slytherin with the certainty he'd displayed on the train. Neville stood at the stool for 4 minutes. Harry watched the hat's brim move slightly, saw Neville's knuckles white on the seat edge, and then came Gryffindor, and Neville's exhale was visible from across the room. Potter, Harry. The hall went quiet. Harry walked to the stool with the easy stride of someone going somewhere they've been before, and sat down, and the hat dropped over his eyes. A voice in his ear, dry and ancient and unexpectedly amused. Well. You are something new. I've been told, Harry thought. Phoenix inheritance, active and developed. 3 years of deliberate practice. The magical maturity of someone considerably older. A pause. And underneath all of it, genuine courage. Not performed. Not compensating. Just there, like your fire. Is there a question? Not really. But I have a professional interest in announcing the difficult ones properly. Another pause. Slytherin would use your cunning. Ravenclaw would use your knowledge. Hufflepuff would value your loyalty and fairness. The voice paused again. But the courage isn't a trait with you. It's a foundation. Everything else yours stands on top of it. Then we agree. Yes. The hat's tone shifted to something that had a smile in it. Though I'll say this for free, you'll burn brighter than any Gryffindor in a generation. Try not to set the castle on fire literally. Harry thought at it, no promises. Gryffindor, the hat announced, with what Harry felt was possibly more volume than strictly necessary. The Gryffindor table erupted. Harry took the hat off, set it back on the stool, and walked to the table with the same unhurried ease, sitting next to a red-headed boy who was looking at him with wide eyes and an expression that said he'd been told a great deal about Harry Potter and was rapidly revising all of it. Ron Weasley, the boy said. Harry looked at him, and felt the familiar assessment running, quick, thorough, reading what was there. Ron Weasley was genuine in the most unself-conscious way imaginable, with the specific comfort of someone who had grown up surrounded by siblings who respected him as a person and not a symbol. He was also, Harry noted, slightly wary, which was interesting because it wasn't the nervous around a legend wary. It was the carefully not getting hopes up wary. The specific guard of someone who had been second to everything their whole life and had learned to protect himself from disappointment by managing expectations early. I know, Harry said. Is Scabbers in your pocket or your trunk? Ron stared at him. My, how do you know about Scabbers? Long story. Your trunk. Pocket, Ron said slowly. I usually keep him, how do you know my rat's name? I'll explain properly later, Harry said. I need you to keep him in a closed box until I can arrange something. Can you do that? Ron looked at him for a very long moment with the expression of someone deciding very quickly whether to be alarmed or to trust. Something in Harry's steady attention apparently resolved this quickly. Yeah, Ron said slowly. Okay. Thank you, Harry said, and meant it. He looked at Ron and thought, Sirius was right. Some things, you had to let surprise you. The first week of classes confirmed several things Harry had already known and added a few he hadn't. McGonagall's transfiguration class was excellent. She turned a desk into a pig and back, set them to turning matchsticks to needles, and moved through the room with the comprehensive awareness of someone who could track 30 children simultaneously. When Harry turned his matchstick to a needle on the first attempt, not a basic needle, a proper steel sewing needle with appropriate taper, she paused at his desk, looked at it, looked at him, and said, good, with exactly the weight those 4 letters could carry. He liked her immediately. Flitwick's charms was similarly good. Small, cheerful, with a genuine love for his subject that made everything he taught feel like a gift rather than a transaction. Snape's potions was interesting for entirely different reasons. Harry had read about Severus Snape at some length, not from Dumbledore's files, which presented the man as a reformed Death Eater placed usefully in Hogwarts, but from a footnote in a legal document about Order of the Phoenix activities that Sharp Fong had obtained. He knew that Snape had been in school with his parents. He knew which side of the childhood dynamic Snape had occupied and which his father had occupied. He knew that James Potter had not always been kind and that Snape had not always been forgiving and that neither of those facts was simple. He also knew, from the personal ward on the Azkaban cell and the careful architecture of Dumbledore's plan, that Snape was deeply embedded in a loyalty structure Harry didn't entirely have the shape of yet. When Snape called his name in roll and followed it with the particular interrogation about Bezoars and monkshood that Harry recognized as a staged performance for the class's benefit, Harry answered all 3 questions correctly and without hesitation, and Snape's eyes did something that was not quite satisfaction and not quite disappointment but something adjacent to both. After class, as the students filed out, Snape said, Potter. A word. Harry stopped. The other students left. He turned and looked at Snape, who was standing behind his desk with his arms folded and the specific expression of a man preparing to deliver a message he's been instructed to deliver and has his own feelings about. Your arrival at Hogwarts, Snape said, has not gone unnoticed by the headmaster. I know, Harry said. He will wish to speak with you. He has arranged a meeting for Saturday morning. All right, Harry said. Snape looked at him. He was doing the thing other adults had done, recalibrating, finding the expected child absent and not quite knowing what to do with its replacement. You are aware, he said carefully, that the headmaster has a particular interest in your development. I'm aware of the full nature of his interest, Harry said, with the same pleasant directness he'd used on Malfoy on the train. He met Snape's dark eyes. I'm also aware that you're in an extremely complicated position between him and me. I don't expect anything from you, Professor. I'm just going to do what I'm going to do. Snape stared at him for a very long moment. Then, so quietly that Harry almost missed it, your mother would have walked in here and said exactly that. Harry looked at him for a moment. I know, he said. Sirius told me. Something moved in Snape's face that was too fast to catch and too complicated to categorize, and Harry turned and walked out of the potions classroom before either of them had to deal with whatever it was. The Saturday morning meeting with Dumbledore was in the headmaster's office, which was exactly as the visions had shown it, circular, full of silver instruments, portraits sleeping on the walls. The instruments chimed occasionally. Fawkes was on his perch, which was the strange part, seeing him here in this room with his official associations around him rather than on Harry's windowsill at night. Fawkes didn't look at Dumbledore as Harry came in. He looked at Harry. Harry sat across from the headmaster and waited. You've settled in well, Dumbledore said. It's a good school, Harry said. The library is excellent. Though the restricted section access policy could be more consistent. The old man's eyes moved. I understand you've already made some connections among your classmates. A few, yes. Longbottom, Dumbledore said. An interesting choice of company. He's interesting, Harry said simply. A pause. Dumbledore looked at Harry over his half-moon glasses. Harry. I want to speak frankly. Please do. What I did, the custodianship, the arrangements for your childhood, the plan I had made, I want you to know that I believe I was trying to protect you and the wizarding world to the best of my ability. I know, Harry said. I believe you believe that. I made mistakes. Several, Harry agreed. The worst of which was deciding the cost was acceptable before asking the person who'd be paying it. Dumbledore was quiet. I'm not interested in punishing you, Harry said. The legal matters will run their course and that's as it should be. But I need you to understand something clearly. He leaned forward slightly. I'm not your instrument. I'm not the version of me you planned for. I'm going to face Voldemort when the time comes and I'm going to do it my way, and your job, if you want one, is to make sure I have access to everything I need. Not filtered through what you think I can handle. Everything. Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment. You trust me that little. I trust you to be consistently yourself, Harry said. Which means I trust you to be clever and knowledgeable and motivated by what you believe is right and prone to deciding that the end justifies the architecture you build around it. He paused. I don't need your trust to be unconditional. I need it to be honest. Another long silence. Then Dumbledore reached into his desk and placed something on the table between them. A small, thin book. Handwritten, not printed. Old. This was your mother's, Dumbledore said quietly. She left it with me for safekeeping after your father died. I should have given it to you years ago. Harry looked at it. His chest did something that had nothing to do with the Phoenix inheritance. He reached out and picked it up. The cover was plain. Inside the front, in handwriting he didn't recognize but recognized, the way you recognize your own face in someone who shares your features, Lily J. Potter, Notes on Inherited Magic, begun January 1981. He held it carefully. Thank you, Harry said, and meant it, and looked up to let Dumbledore see that he meant it. The old man nodded. The thing in the vault below the school, he said. You felt it. From the lake. It's the Philosopher's Stone, Dumbledore said. I moved it here because I believed someone would attempt to steal it. Someone will, Harry said. It's not Professor Quirrell specifically who'll attempt the theft. He paused. It's what's sharing Professor Quirrell's head. The silence this time was of a different quality. You knew, Dumbledore said. I've known since the Sorting Feast. Harry set his mother's book in his lap. What is the plan for handling it? I had hoped, Dumbledore said, slowly, that the protective enchantments I placed would be sufficient. They're not, Harry said. They're genuinely good enchantments. But the problem with enchantments is that they're static and the thing we're dealing with is adaptive. He met the blue eyes directly. Tell me everything you know about what's in Quirrell's head and how it's maintaining itself. I want to understand the full mechanism before we decide how to address it. Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment. Then he started talking, and this time Harry could feel the difference, not the managed briefing of someone presenting the information they've decided to share, but the actual, full account of a man who has made the calculation that genuine honesty will produce a better outcome than careful omission. Harry listened to every word. November brought frost on the Hogwarts grounds and the discovery that Harry was, apparently, a natural seeker, which Neville found hilarious and Hermione found statistically interesting. Harry found it convenient. A position on the Quidditch team gave him movement around the grounds that wouldn't otherwise be explained, and he'd been wanting a better look at the third-floor corridor. What he found there confirmed his assessment of the stone's protection. The enchantments were clever, genuinely so. McGonagall's chess pieces and Flitwick's flying keys and Sprout's devil's snare all required specific magical knowledge to bypass. But they were designed for an intrusion from outside moving in. They assumed the intruder had no inside knowledge. Voldemort, housed in Quirrell's skull and accessing decades of experience, had inside knowledge. Harry discussed this with Hermione over dinner on a Thursday, speaking quietly at the end of the Gryffindor table while Neville listened and Ron ate steadily and absorbed information in the comfortable way of someone accustomed to processing things alongside food. "The Mirror of Erist," Harry said. "Dumbledore put it at the end of the sequence. Do you know what it does?" "Shows you what you want most," Hermione said immediately. "It's in Fantastic Magical Artifacts, Chapter 8. Breed's classification puts it in the revelatory category." "Not just shows," Harry said. "It shows and then holds the reflection. Dumbledore enchanted it specifically so that only someone who wanted to find the stone but not use it could retrieve it from the mirror." He looked at the table. "It's actually brilliant. The problem is that Quirrell, working for Voldemort, wants to use it. So the mirror's protection is intact." "So what's the problem?" Ron asked, through a mouthful of potato. "The problem is that we're waiting for Quirrell to try and fail and retreat, and then the situation resolves itself," Harry said. "Except that's not what happens. He tries, he fails, Voldemort gets frustrated, something more drastic occurs." He paused. "I want to end it before it gets drastic." "How?" Neville asked. Harry looked at his hands. "The inheritance," he said. "Phoenix fire. Voldemort's current state is a partial soul, fragmented, unstable, maintained only by its possession of Quirrell as a host. Direct contact with Phoenix fire, which is the magical opposite of soul fragmentation, it's a fire that heals and transforms rather than destroys, should make maintaining possession of Quirrell unsustainable." Hermione stared at him. "You want to burn Voldemort out of Quirrell's head." "I want to make Quirrell's body an inhospitable environment for Voldemort's specific type of parasitic soul fragment." Harry paused. "Yes. Essentially." Silence. "That's either brilliant or insane," Ron said. "The distinction tends to be whether it works," Harry said. "Is Quirrell?" Neville looked troubled. "What happens to him?" This was the question Harry had been sitting with. Quirrell chose this. He sought Voldemort out. He made a bargain. He was quiet for a moment. "But I won't do it in a way that kills him if there's any chance it doesn't have to. The soul fragment can be driven out. What happens to Quirrell's body after that depends on how long the possession has been running and how much of himself is still intact under it." He looked at the table. "It might not be survivable. That's not my choice. But it shouldn't be my goal." Hermione was looking at him with the expression she'd adopted more and more often over the past 2 months, not the careful assessment of the first day but something that had moved past assessment into the specific attention of someone who has decided to be someone's friend and is paying attention accordingly. "What do you need us to do?" "I need you three to know the plan," Harry said. "I need Neville specifically, because," he paused. "You're Earth magic. Have you noticed anything happening in the herbology greenhouses? Anything that responds to you specifically?" Neville blinked. "Professor Sprout said I have an unusual affinity. She said the plants respond to me like they know me." "They do know you," Harry said. "Or rather they recognize what you are. I want you to come with me to the vault. The Devil's Snare responds to warmth and light. It also responds, I suspect, to your specific signature. You won't need the Lumos. You'll just need to put your hands in it." Neville stared. "You want me to just touch the Devil's Snare?" "Yes. That kills people." "Not you," Harry said, with the certainty of someone who has checked this from every available angle. "Not you." Neville was quiet for a moment. Then, "Okay." Ron was looking between them. "What do I do?" "Chess," Harry said. "McGonagall's pieces are set to respond to skilled players. You're the best chess player I've met. You'll need to play the game, get us through." Ron sat up slightly. "I'm really good at chess." "I know," Harry said. That's why I'm telling you. Hermione had her book open. She was already reviewing the flying keys section. Harry sat back and thought about Quirrell and what lived behind his eyes, and felt the ember in his chest burning with the specific steadiness of something that has been warm its whole life and is not afraid of cold. They went on a Friday night in December, 3 weeks before the Christmas break, when the castle was quiet and the staff preoccupied with end-of-term preparations. Harry had told Dumbledore what he was planning, told him in the Saturday meeting 2 weeks prior, laid out the full sequence, given him the option to redirect or reinforce. Dumbledore had listened and then said, very carefully, I believe you can do this, which was the closest thing to I trust you the old man had yet managed, and Harry had accepted it for what it was. The trapdoor. The devil's snare, which Neville touched and which curled back like something greeting an old friend, retreating into the walls with a whispering sound that was almost language. The flying keys, through which Hermione flew with cold precision and a clear eye for the right one. Ron's chess game, which he played with the focused intensity of someone in their element, sacrificing pieces with the specific bravery of someone who knows that a sacrifice made by choice is entirely different from one made by manipulation. The last chamber was the mirror room. Harry went alone from there. This had been the plan. He went through the flames, purple on one side, black on the other, the logic puzzle Hermione had solved in 40 seconds and pressed his arm briefly in silent acknowledgement, and into the room with the mirror of Eriste. Quirrell was already there. He was standing before the mirror with his hands raised, muttering, his body rigid with the effort of trying to extract something the mirror was refusing to give. His turban was slightly askew. In the reflection, his eyes were wrong, 2 sets of eyes, one behind the other, one the faded blue of a nervous man from the north of England and one the red of something old and terrible. Quirrell turned at Harry's entrance. His face moved through fear and then something that supplanted the fear from beneath, a cold, ancient contempt that was not Quirrell's own. Harry Potter, said a voice that was not entirely Quirrell's. Voldemort, Harry said, pleasantly. You look uncomfortable. A pause. The red-eyed thing behind Quirrell's eyes shifted. You are not afraid. No. Harry stood in the doorway without moving. I want to offer you something before this becomes difficult. You are 11 years old. I'm 11 years old with a Phoenix inheritance, Harry said. And I've been thinking about you since I was 6. I know what you are, what's left of you, and what you need. He walked forward slowly, neither threatening nor performing calm, just moving the way he moved, as if the space belonged to him not because he'd taken it but because he'd never needed anyone's permission to inhabit it. The philosopher's stone won't restore you. I need you to know that. The stone creates the elixir of life, which sustains a living body. You don't have a living body. You have a fragment. The elixir won't cohere with a soul piece the way it coheres with a whole soul. Quirrell's body stiffened. The red eyes flickered. You know nothing, I've read extensively on soul theory, Harry said. Including Nicholas Flamel's correspondence, which is in the Gringotts archive because Flamel was a Gringotts client for 400 years and left his research notes on deposit. He was 10 feet from Quirrell now. The stone won't give you what you want. But that's not why I'm here. Then why are you here, boy? Harry stopped walking. To give you a choice. Leave Quirrell. Go. Find whatever remains available to you and pursue your restoration through methods that don't involve my school or my classmates or the murder of anyone in this building. He paused. Or stay, and I'll drive you out, and the method I use will damage what's left of your soul fragment significantly. The red eyes stared at him through Quirrell's face for a long moment. You genuinely believe you can threaten me, Voldemort said, and the contempt had shifted slightly, not gone, but with something underneath it that was not quite uncertainty but was the texture of something that had just encountered an unexpected variable. I'm not threatening you, Harry said. I'm giving you accurate information about your options. He held up his right hand. The palm was lit from within, the phoenix warmth bright and steady and warm in the cold room. I'm 11. This is a fraction of what I'll be in 10 years. And you won't survive this encounter in your current state. He met the red eyes directly. Go. Voldemort was silent for a very long moment. Then Quirrell screamed. It was not the sound of someone in fear. It was the sound of two things trying to occupy the same space as one of them began to burn. Quirrell's body arched backward, his hands going to his turban, tearing at it. The cloth came away and behind it was the face that Harry had seen in the vision of the night his parents died, distorted and wrong, the face of a soul fragment maintaining itself in borrowed flesh. Harry walked forward and pressed his palm flat against Quirrell's forehead. The fire that came was not the consuming kind. It was the transformative kind, the kind that Helena Ignis had used, the kind that changed the state of things. It moved through the point of contact and into the connection between Quirrell and what inhabited him, and it burned at the junction, specifically, precisely, the way a surgeon's instrument burns rather than a wildfire. Voldemort's scream, not Quirrell's, Voldemort's, a sound that had not come from anything with a body for a decade, filled the room like pressure. Then it passed through the walls like smoke passing through a keyhole, and was gone. Quirrell dropped. Harry caught him, barely. The man was taller than Harry by a foot, but the phoenix warmth gave him strength he didn't strictly have, and he lowered Quirrell to the ground as carefully as he could. He checked pulse, breathing, the specific magical signature of the man's own life force. Present. Diminished, damaged, clearly traumatized. But present. He put his palm against Quirrell's chest briefly and let the warmth do what it could for what was there, which was not everything that needed doing but was something. Then he stood up and looked at the mirror of Eriste. His reflection looked back at him. Just him. No one standing beside him, no objects in his hands, no victory posed for an audience. Just Harry, standing in a stone room underground, looking at himself. He thought about what Dumbledore had once said to a different boy in a different telling of this story: you show the most desperate desire of your heart. Harry looked at his reflection for a long moment. The reflection looked back with green eyes that held no fear, no hunger, no desperate reaching for something absent. He looked, Harry thought, like someone who had already decided to be all right. He turned and walked back through the fire. Dumbledore was waiting at the trapdoor when Harry came up. Quirrell was with the school Medowitch. Ron had a broken wrist from the chess game, a knight had gotten one move ahead of him and clipped his arm, and he'd finished the game anyway, which said everything about Ron Weasley. Hermione had a slight burn from the black fire, already treated. Neville had emerged from the Devil's Snare room with the expression of someone who has just had a fundamental fact about themselves confirmed and is still processing it. Harry came up through the trapdoor and dusted himself off. He's gone, Harry said. Not destroyed, I was clear about that from the beginning. I don't think it was possible in this setting. But driven out and considerably weakened. He paused. Quirrell is alive. I don't know his long-term prognosis. Dumbledore looked at him with an expression that Harry was starting to read more accurately. It was the expression of a man revising his model of the world, which was something the old man apparently did very rarely and very thoroughly when he finally did it. The stone, Dumbledore said. Still in the mirror. You should probably move it. Or destroy it, honestly. Harry met the blue eyes. Nicholas Flamel has lived long enough. He'd probably agree, if you asked him. Try asking. Dumbledore was quiet. Also, Harry said. I want the full account of what a Horcrux is and how many Voldemort made. That's the real restoration problem, and we need to talk about it before it becomes urgent. The old man went very still. I found the term in my mother's notes, Harry said. She was thorough. January 1981, she wrote about it extensively. She'd worked it out and she was afraid, and she wrote every detail she had. He held up the small book, which he'd had in his pocket since the Saturday meeting where Dumbledore had given it to him. She left you good notes. We should use them. He handed the book back. Dumbledore took it. He looked down at it for a long moment with the expression of a man looking at an accounting of his own failures that is presented with such directness it can't be deflected. Then he looked up. All right, he said. Come to my office. Tomorrow, Harry said. I need to check on Ron's wrist first. And he walked down the corridor toward the hospital wing, past the portraits of sleeping wizards and witches who had been watching for 1,000 years, through the quiet deep of night Hogwarts air, with the ember warm and steady in his chest, his mother's notes in his pocket, and 5 years of work yet to do and the absolute conviction that he would do it. Behind him, in the headmaster's circular office, a silver instrument on the corner of a desk chimed softly. For the first time in years, the scales on the instrument sat level.